Welcome to the Noble Stories, where legends and nightmares collide. Each tale will test your courage, twist your reality, and haunt your dreams. Are you brave enough to listen? Subscribe and turn on notifications, if you dare.
Story 1. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I am 28 years old, and this story happened in the autumn of last year. It was meant to be the culmination of my photography project, a chance to capture the rare blood moon from the summit of Mount Mitchell in North Carolina, the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. I believed it would be a thrilling adventure, just me and my loyal husky, Luna, conquering the rugged trails. Nothing could have prepared me for the horrors I would face on that mountain. What I lived through still haunts my every waking moment. I had saved enough money to take a few weeks off my freelance photography gigs. My plan was straightforward: reach Mount Mitchell State Park, hike up to a strategic vantage point, and shoot a series of photographs as the blood moon rose. The event had generated plenty of buzz in the astronomy and outdoor communities. The idea of capturing the moonlit sky from the eastern edge of the continental U.S. felt like the pinnacle of my work. Luna, my Siberian husky, came from a rescue shelter, and she had been trained in search and rescue drills. We'd done countless trips together, and she was remarkably attuned to changes in weather and environment. Though she couldn't speak, her body language was more than enough to warn me of danger, at least when that danger was natural. The day I arrived at the park, the weather was temperate, exactly as forecasted. I'd made meticulous preparations: hiking gear, satellite phone, topographic maps, and enough provisions to last a week. I felt a flicker of excitement surge through me as Luna leapt out of my Jeep, tail wagging, ready for whatever awaited us. I stopped by a small ranger station to double-check conditions. Most staff were friendly, but one ranger, a young woman named Maya Ramirez, seemed keenly interested in my trip. She asked if I was going alone, and I explained that aside from Luna, yes, I intended to go solo. Maya looked concerned, but quickly offered her services as a local guide. Her knowledge of Mount Mitchell's trails and backcountry was extensive, she claimed. She also mentioned rumors of hikers going missing in recent weeks, especially around the upcoming blood moon. She didn't come right out and say it was something supernatural, but her tone carried a distinct unease. I should have taken her hint more seriously. However, feeling confident in my own experience, I declined her offer politely. Instead, I requested just a few tips on trail conditions and water sources. Maya's dark eyes bore into mine for a moment, and she insisted I camp away from certain old growth areas, a point she wouldn't elaborate on. Before I could press her for details, another visitor distracted her, and I left the station thinking she was just a little too superstitious about local legends. I began my ascent later that afternoon. The first leg of the hike was calm, almost serene. Towering trees sheltered me from direct sunlight. The crisp mountain air invigorated me. Luna bounded ahead, sniffing everything in sight. I made quick progress, stopping occasionally to snap preliminary photographs. By nightfall, I found a small clearing to set up camp, pitched my tent, and cooked dinner over a portable stove. Luna curled up beside me as I ate, the flames dancing in her bright blue eyes. The next morning, I awoke to an unexpected chill in the air. My watch showed it was just above freezing. It shouldn't have been that cold for this region at this time of year, but I shrugged it off. Weather in the mountains can be fickle. After breakfast, I continued trekking higher up. About midday, I came across something unusual: a series of strange symbols etched into the bark of a gnarled tree. They looked vaguely like crude stick figures surrounded by jagged circles. It reminded me of something from old folklore. My curiosity piqued, but I kept moving, chalking it up to bored campers or local teens pulling a prank. Around dusk, as I neared a ridgeline, I heard a voice call my name. I spun around, startled, and spotted a lone figure climbing the trail behind me. He wore rugged hiking gear and had a broad grin on his face. "Ethan Caldwell, right?" he called out. "Maya said I might find you up here." His name was Tommy Green. He claimed he'd run into Maya at the ranger station, and she mentioned a photographer heading up the mountain. He looked to be in his early 30s, charismatic, with an air of casual confidence. Something about his sudden appearance made me uneasy, but he seemed harmless enough at first glance. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, adjusting his pack, "but Maya insisted someone should join you. She was worried you'd get lost or run into trouble." I wasn't thrilled about having an uninvited companion, yet I couldn't blame Maya for trying to ensure my safety. Maybe it wasn't a bad idea to have another person along, just in case. Besides, Tommy sounded amiable, and if he knew the local area, he might be useful. We decided to make camp together for the night. Luna, however, acted strangely around him. She kept her distance, whining softly whenever he approached. As we set up our tents, I noticed the air was growing colder by the hour. Clouds gathered overhead, forming an unnatural haze that blocked out the stars. Tommy and I talked about our backgrounds. He said he was a local who'd done the Mount Mitchell trek several times. He hinted at a deep interest in local legends, though he was vague about the details. When I pressed him, he shrugged it off as just stories. That night, I was jolted awake by Luna's growling. Outside the tent, the trees rustled as though something large was moving through them. My heart thumped. Grabbing my flashlight and unzipping the flap just enough to see, I caught a glimpse of a tall, emaciated figure darting between the trees. It was fleeting, but enough to fill me with dread. I felt sure I was looking at a person, yet its motions were too swift, too distorted. Luna started barking wildly, yanking at her leash. By the time I scrambled out of the tent, the figure had vanished. Tommy emerged with a startled look, claiming he'd heard something too but hadn't seen anything. The following morning, I discovered large footprints pressed into the soft earth around our campsite. They were elongated, almost clawed. Each track was spaced unnaturally far apart, as if this thing had a massive stride. Tommy suggested it was a black bear, maybe with some paw deformity, but something inside me knew better. Despite the unease, I convinced myself it was probably a wild animal spooked by our presence. We packed up and continued the climb. The deeper we went, the colder it became, even as the midday sun tried to pierce the hazy clouds. Luna's anxious behavior persisted. She'd sniff the air and whimper or growl for no apparent reason. At midday, we caught sight of Maya trudging up the trail behind us. She said she couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into something dangerous and had decided to follow, wanting to help. I was initially relieved to see her. Tommy, on the other hand, seemed less enthusiastic. He forced a grin, but I noticed the tension in his posture. The group dynamic shifted instantly. Maya and Tommy apparently knew each other but spoke guardedly, never offering more than a polite exchange. Something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. We forged ahead until we reached a narrow plateau not far from Mount Mitchell's highest ridge. Tommy insisted we camp there, claiming the vantage point was perfect for viewing the blood moon that night. The plan was to rest, then summit early in the morning for the final shots. In retrospect, this was the worst decision we could have made, but at the time, it felt logical. As we pitched our tents in that plateau, Maya warned us of an old local legend. People spoke of a spirit called the Wendigo, a malevolent, cannibalistic entity from Native American folklore. According to the stories, the Wendigo would stalk lost travelers, especially during a blood moon. Her voice shook slightly, betraying her own fear. Tommy, however, dismissed her stories as nonsense. He teased her, calling them campfire tall tales. Night fell, and the moon began its ascent, glowing a vivid crimson. A sense of foreboding weighed on me. My camera equipment, which had worked flawlessly earlier, now malfunctioned. The battery drained impossibly fast, and my backup refused to power on. Confused and frustrated, I decided to try a different approach in the morning, hoping the blood moon would remain long enough for some dawn shots. As I sat by the fire, warming my hands, I noticed that Maya kept shooting cautious glances at Tommy. Eventually, she muttered something about checking a water source a bit further down the trail and asked me to come along. Luna followed, trotting at my heels. As soon as we were out of earshot, Maya leaned in close. "I don't trust him," she whispered. "He's been involved with some local group. People say they worship forest spirits or something darker. I think he's leading us into trouble. These disappearances? I suspect he knows more than he's letting on." I asked her why she hadn't come forward earlier, and she said she tried to warn me back at the station. She hadn't wanted to scare me away from the trip altogether or make accusations without proof. Now, she was convinced we had to leave immediately. I glanced back at the glow of our campsite. Tommy's silhouette flickered in the firelight. Before I could answer, Luna's ears perked. She growled at the surrounding darkness. I whipped my flashlight around, scanning the trees. Flickers of movement caught the edge of my vision. Branches snapping, leaves rustling. Something was circling us. Maya and I crouched, heart pounding. There came a bone-chilling screech, unlike anything I'd ever heard. We sprinted back to camp. When we arrived, we found Tommy standing near the fire gripping a hunting knife. He looked tense but lowered the blade when he saw us. I didn't say anything about Maya's concerns, but the atmosphere was decidedly uneasy. Another blood-curdling wail echoed through the trees, and Luna started barking frantically. The sound grew closer, resonating with an almost human quality. "It's out there," Tommy said, eyes wild. "Some kind of creature." He seemed genuinely startled, or at least he was doing an excellent job pretending. We stoked the campfire higher, its crackling flames offering little comfort against the vast darkness. The wind picked up, carrying the stench of decay. My mind flashed back to the footprints around our previous campsite. Could this be the same thing? Midnight approached, and the blood moon cast an otherworldly glow, giving everything a dark crimson tint. A hush fell over the forest, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Then, out of nowhere, a terrifying shriek rang out, closer this time. Luna howled, baring her teeth. Maya drew a small revolver from her backpack while Tommy tightened his grip on his knife. Suddenly, the underbrush exploded with motion. My flashlight flickered over a gaunt, pale figure with impossibly elongated limbs. Its eyes glowed like embers, and it darted around the perimeter of the camp, moving with unnatural speed. The stench grew overpowering, as though years of decay clung to its flesh. "Wendigo," Maya breathed, her voice shaking. In a heartbeat, the thing lunged at Tommy. He slashed wildly but was knocked to the ground by an inhumanly strong blow. Maya fired her revolver. The shot rang out, echoing across the plateau. The creature screeched and vanished into the darkness. We rushed to Tommy's side where he lay clutching his arm, a gash already seeping blood. He looked dazed, but otherwise okay. Panic flooded my veins. Whatever that thing was, it was real and deadly. Maya helped Tommy to his feet, and we retreated to the tents, trying to form a defensive circle. I wanted to break camp right then and flee, but nighttime navigation down steep trails was dangerous, especially with that creature prowling around. My head spun. Did we wait until dawn, risking another attack? Or did we brave the darkness and possibly get lost? Tommy's face twisted with pain as Maya bandaged his wound. His reaction was odd, though. He didn't seem as terrified as I would have expected. After the initial shock wore off, he almost appeared angry more than anything else. Luna kept growling at him, which I dismissed as stress from the attack. But the dog's instincts usually weren't wrong. Our decision was made when the Wendigo attacked again. It lunged straight into the center of our makeshift campsite. Maya fired 2 more shots. One bullet glanced off a tree, the other seemed to hit the thing in the shoulder. It hissed and leapt backward, but not before slashing Maya across the leg. She collapsed, screaming. We scrambled to help her, but in that split second, the creature took advantage of our vulnerability. It dragged Tommy into the darkness with a single, fluid motion. He let out a blood-curdling yell, and then silence. Luna raced after them, barking frenetically. I chased after her, adrenaline surging, my flashlight beam dancing wildly over the forest floor. I heard Tommy's screams echo through the trees, growing fainter. Then abruptly, they stopped. Darkness pressed in around me as I realized, horrified, that I might be next. Gasping for breath, I turned back to find Maya. She was dragging herself toward the fire, her leg slick with blood. The fear in her eyes was raw. We both knew Tommy was likely gone, or worse. The idea of leaving him at the mercy of that monstrous thing turned my stomach. But we had no choice but to regroup first. Maya's condition demanded immediate attention. I managed to stop the bleeding, using strips from my spare shirt as a makeshift bandage. Luna stood guard, ears flat, scanning the shadows for any sign of the Wendigo or Tommy. That's when I heard a strangled cry, Tommy's voice. "You hear that?" Maya whispered, wincing in pain. I nodded, heart racing. Tommy was still alive, somewhere out there, and it sounded like he was in agony. Against every survival instinct telling me to run, I knew I had to at least try to help him. Maya insisted on coming along, hobbling on her wounded leg. I told her she should stay back, but she refused. Following the anguished sounds, we ventured deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, the path more treacherous. The blood moon's glow filtered through the branches, painting everything in surreal shades of red. Every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Eventually, we found a small clearing. Luna whimpered, and I shone my flashlight ahead. Tommy lay on the ground, clothes torn, face streaked with blood. In front of him stood two hooded figures, and behind them, that dreadful Wendigo, looming over a circle of carved symbols in the dirt. At first, I assumed these hooded figures were cultists, but as I crept closer, I recognized the face beneath one of the hoods. It was the ranger station employee who'd greeted me on my first day, a man I'd barely noticed at the time. They were chanting in low voices. Tommy writhed in the center of the circle, bound by ropes to a jagged stake. His screams pierced the night. Maya raised her revolver, hands trembling. Before she could fire, the Wendigo stepped forward, its ghastly face contorting into something like a mockery of a grin. One of the hooded figures began speaking in a language I couldn't understand, drawing a knife. My flashlight flickered, the battery near depletion. The entire scene felt unreal, like stepping into a nightmare. Suddenly, Tommy's screams turned into raucous laughter. He twisted his head toward us. "I told you," he hissed. "They would come." It was a trap. A wave of dizziness washed over me as it dawned on me that Tommy had likely been working with this cult from the start. Maya's suspicions had been correct. He had staged his own kidnapping, or at least collaborated somehow to lure us here. To what end, I had no idea. Sacrifice? Possession? The Wendigo advanced on me, that stench of decay overwhelming. Its eyes, burning embers, locked onto mine. In a flash, Luna lunged at it, snarling viciously. A single swipe of the creature's elongated arm sent her yelping, crashing into a tree. My stomach lurched, but I had to keep moving. Maya fired. The bullet caught the Wendigo in the side. It shrieked, more in fury than pain, and raked its claws across the air, narrowly missing her. Then Tommy gave a guttural cry, and one of the hooded figures plunged a blade into his shoulder. Perhaps it was punishment for failing to deliver us as smoothly as planned. The next moment, my flashlight died completely, plunging us into near darkness, lit only by the crimson moon and a small flashlight Maya still had. I heard chanting intensify. Then Tommy's voice changed, taking on a hollow, echoing quality. He began thrashing violently, ropes snapping. Maya's flashlight flickered over him, revealing his face contorted in rage, eyes glowing faintly red. The figure who had stabbed him cackled, stepping back. Whatever ritual was underway, it had possessed Tommy with something terrible. Maya limped toward me, but Tommy, now under this malevolent influence, attacked with startling speed. He seized her by the arm and wrenched the gun away, flinging it aside. In the dim light, I saw her eyes widen with horror as he raised the knife he'd pulled from his own wound. Something in his expression told me he was no longer fully in control of himself. "Maya!" I yelled, grabbing a large branch from the ground. I swung wildly at Tommy, but he dodged with uncanny agility, letting out an inhuman growl. He turned to me, face twisted. The chanting from the hooded figures crescendoed as the Wendigo circled, as though anticipating the final kill. With no other options, I charged Tommy, tackling him. We crashed into the dirt, rolling dangerously close to the bizarre ritual circle. His strength was overwhelming, unnatural. He pinned me, blade gleaming. I squirmed and felt the cold steel bite into my shoulder. Pain flared. Warm blood trickled down my arm. I pushed back, forcing the blade off course. Desperation took over, and I drove my knee into his side. He staggered enough for me to twist free and grab his wrist, wrestling for the knife. With a burst of panic-fueled strength, I forced the blade away from my throat. Then, with a savage cry, Maya grabbed a rock and brought it down on Tommy's head. He collapsed, dazed. We had seconds at most. A shriek ripped through the clearing as the Wendigo lunged again. One of the hooded figures chanted faster, a frenzied command. Before the creature could reach us, Luna barreled in, limping but alive, latching her jaws around the Wendigo's arm. Its roar of pain echoed through the night. Seizing this chance, Maya yanked Tommy's motionless body off me. I snatched the fallen revolver. My heart hammered as I aimed at the hooded figures. I fired twice, the gunshots reverberating through the trees. One figure collapsed instantly. The other scrambled back, fleeing into the darkness. The Wendigo lashed out in fury, batting Luna aside. I pulled the trigger again, the shot catching the beast in the chest. It staggered, let out an ear-splitting shriek, then retreated into the night with unnatural speed. Tommy lay there, gasping. The malevolent glow in his eyes flickered, then dissipated, leaving him pale and shaking. Maya and I exchanged a bewildered look. Could he be saved? Should we even try? He had led us into a trap, and yet at that moment he looked human and terrified. With no time to spare, we hoisted him up. He muttered incoherently, drifting in and out of consciousness. Maya's leg wound bled profusely and my own shoulder throbbed. We had to get off the mountain before the Wendigo or the remaining cultist returned. We stumbled through the forest, guided by the faint light of Maya's flashlight. At some point, we lost the trail entirely, forced to navigate by memory and the occasional reflective blaze on a tree trunk. Exhaustion and fear ate at me, but adrenaline kept me moving. Luna stayed close, limping but resolute, her ears perked for any sign of pursuit. Night stretched on interminably. Twice we heard the Wendigo's distant howls, each time causing my blood to run cold. Eventually, we reached a rocky outcropping that offered a precarious path down. Maya nearly slipped, and only my grip on her pack saved her from toppling over the edge. Tommy muttered feverishly, half delirious. Despite everything, we clung to life. When the first rays of dawn broke, the blood moon vanished, and its crimson hue faded from the sky. We stumbled into a lower stretch of the trail, where we encountered 2 park rangers. At the sight of our injuries and Tommy's near catatonic state, they sprang into action, calling for medical help. An ambulance eventually arrived at a nearby access road, whisking us away to a hospital in Asheville. But our ordeal was far from over. The local authorities questioned us in detail. Our claims about a cannibalistic creature and hooded figures in the woods were met with skepticism. Tommy, when he regained consciousness, offered no coherent explanation. He claimed to recall nothing after the Wendigo's initial attack. The battered remains of one hooded figure were found, but the official report suggested an animal attack. A week later, a pair of FBI agents paid me a visit in my hospital room. They were calm, polite, and disturbingly vague. They asked for every detail, writing notes but never betraying any reaction. The next day, local media reported that a tragic accident had occurred on Mount Mitchell. citing wild animal attacks and inclement weather. Maya and I attempted to contact journalists, but we were stonewalled at every turn. It became clear that some higher power was working to bury the truth. Whether out of disbelief or fear, I can't say. Maya recovered from her injuries, though she walks with a limp now. Tommy disappeared soon after he was discharged from the hospital, fled the area, or maybe something else happened to him. The authorities claimed they had no knowledge of his whereabouts. Luna healed up as well, her loyalty never wavering. As for me, I still wake from nightmares, drenched in cold sweat. Images of that gaunt, pale monstrosity burned into my mind. My shoulder aches whenever I think of the knife that nearly ended my life. I haven't touched my camera in months, nor have I ventured out on a solo hike since. My trust in strangers has eroded, replaced by the gnawing fear that there are things out there we cannot understand, and people who will go to terrifying lengths to harness them. I share this story not to sensationalize or to seek attention, but because I believe the truth matters, no matter how grim or unbelievable it might be. Some nights, when the moon is bright, I swear I can still hear that shrill, haunting cry, echoing across the ridges of Mount Mitchell. Whether it's just my traumatized mind or something real, I don't know. But I do know that place holds a darkness beyond comprehension, and there are those, human and otherwise, who dwell in its shadows. I am Ethan Caldwell, and this is the account of the blood moon over Mount Mitchell. Take from it what you will. If you ever find yourself drawn to that peak when the crimson moon rises, be warned. The mountain doesn't care about your ambitions or dreams. It might just be hungry. Story 2. My name is Maya Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. The story I'm about to share happened to me in the spring of 2025, deep in a remote mountain range of North Carolina known as Devil's Backbone. I doubt anyone will believe me, but I need to put these words down, if only to remind myself that every waking nightmare was real. I first heard about Devil's Backbone a few months before I decided to go. It was famous among hikers for its treacherous trails and unpredictable weather. Rumors claimed that strange events befell those who ventured too far. Vanishings, unexplained accidents, and whispers of an ancient evil lurking among the rocky peaks. Naturally, the challenge drew me in. Despite having completed numerous backcountry hikes across the country, I wanted a local guide for this one. Friends told me about Jake Martinez, a charismatic North Carolina native in his early 30s. They said he knew Devil's Backbone better than anyone else alive. He agreed to guide me for a reasonable fee, which only fueled my excitement. My best friend, Lily Parker, 27, cautious by nature, insisted on tagging along to keep me grounded, as she put it. Then there was Ethan Brooks, a tech-savvy friend of ours who specialized in high-end hiking and survival gear. He joined partly out of curiosity and partly because he wanted to document the experience for his survival blog. He was a few years older than me, early 30s, and prone to mild paranoia about everything from wildlife to the weather. I met up with Jake, Lily, and Ethan near a dirt parking area at the base of Devil's Backbone one drizzly morning. The weather had been forecast to be clear, but the sky was a steely gray. As soon as I stepped out of my Jeep, I felt a sense of weight pressing down on me, like something in the air was warning me to turn around. Lily said she felt a chill, too, despite the mild temperature. Only Jake seemed at ease. Dad. "Morning, folks," he greeted us with a friendly smile. "Hope you're ready for the adventure of your lives." We took that statement as a sign of enthusiasm. In hindsight, it feels more like a grim prophecy. Jake led the way up a narrow trail that snaked along the edge of a cliff. I walked behind him, while Lily and Ethan followed. Within the first hour, Ethan's top-of-the-line GPS started glitching. He grumbled and tried to recalibrate it, but the location kept drifting erratically, as if we were teleporting around the map. At the same time, my compass needle spun in circles, completely useless. It wasn't the first time equipment had acted up on a hike, but it was certainly the strangest. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease in Lily's eyes told me she was frightened. Jake's expression darkened when I showed him my malfunctioning compass. "Might just be some odd magnetic field in the rocks," he said, but his tone was too flat, too guarded. We set up our first campsite on a small plateau. The view might have been beautiful on a clear day, but the sky remained shrouded in low-hanging clouds that looked ready to burst. We pitched our tents close to a few scraggly pines, hoping they would buffer any wind. That night, after a meager dinner, we gathered around a dying campfire. Lily huddled close to the flames. The drop in temperature was dramatic. Ethan tried to record some footage for his blog, but his camera batteries kept draining almost instantly. He swapped them out for fresh ones twice, but each died within minutes. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered, frustration in his voice. Then came the sound. Faint at first, like distant laughter. I froze, thinking maybe there were other campers nearby, but it sounded like a child's laughter, which made no sense. Lily caught my eye across the fire. Her face was pale. We all heard it. Jake insisted we ignore it, said it was just the wind. But wind doesn't giggle. The next morning, the fog was so dense that we couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Our plan was to trek another few miles higher up before making a second camp. Lily whispered to me that we should think about turning back. "Something doesn't feel right," she said, her voice trembling. Stubborn determination flared in me. I'd come this far, after all, and Jake assured us he could guide us without the compass or GPS. "I know these trails well," he insisted. We pressed on. The terrain grew steeper, and loose gravel threatened to send us tumbling down the slope if we weren't careful. Every so often, Jake would pause to scan the surroundings, looking for landmarks, an odd-shaped boulder or a cluster of stunted trees that he recognized. Around midday, I noticed ancient symbols carved into the rock face near a narrow pass. They looked like swirling shapes and runes. Some were partially eroded, while others appeared freshly etched. My heart pounded as I approached them, an inexplicable dread blooming inside me. Jake rushed me along, clearly uneasy. "We need to keep moving," he said. "This spot's not safe." "Not safe how?" Ethan asked, but Jake dodged the question with a vague mumble. That afternoon, we made slower progress than expected. The path seemed to twist back on itself, leading us in circles. We'd come upon the same tree with the same gnarled trunk again and again, even though Jake swore we were heading west. Lily, exasperated, demanded, "Are you sure you know where you're going?" Jake just nodded, refusing to meet her eyes. Eventually, we found a small clearing where we could set up our tents. Our nerves were frayed from hours of trudging through that all-encompassing fog. Darkness fell early, and the stillness of the mountain pressed in around us. We tried to get some rest, but the night refused to grant us that mercy. Sometime past midnight, I awoke to Jake hissing my name outside my tent. His voice shook. When I emerged, Lily and Ethan were already there, flashlights in hand. Jake pointed into the fog where I could just make out the silhouette of a child. Small, hunched, wearing what looked like outdated clothes. The child made no sound, just stood there, staring in our direction. My heart thundered. "Hello?" I called out, voice echoing in the oppressive silence. The child took a step closer, then another. I moved forward before anyone could stop me. But as soon as my flashlight beam fell across that figure, the child vanished into the murk like a wisp of smoke. We spent a sleepless night trying to rationalize what we'd seen, tossing out explanations, exhaustion, hallucination, the fog playing tricks on our eyes. None of us believed it. By morning, we looked like a group of wary fugitives, bleary-eyed and jumpy at every sound. Jake insisted we push higher into the mountain, claiming we were only about 3 miles from a safer plateau with fresh water. Lily objected the loudest, but I overruled her, wanting to salvage something from this nightmare. Ethan was on the fence but didn't want to split up. That might have been the biggest mistake of our lives, continuing up that cursed path. We hadn't gone far when everything seemed to implode. My memory of what happened next is tangled with adrenaline and terror. One moment we were hiking along a ridge, and the next I stumbled into a hidden glade. Strange, twisted trees formed an arch, and at its center I saw a small stone altar carved with the same ancient symbols. My blood turned cold. This was not an ordinary place. Jake turned on me abruptly, eyes wild. He muttered something I couldn't make out, but it sounded like an apology mixed with desperation. Then, with lightning speed, he grabbed Lily, twisting her arm behind her back. She shrieked, and Ethan and I scrambled to help, but Jake brandished a hunting knife. I saw the anguish on his face, but he wore a twisted, determined expression, as though fulfilling some terrible obligation. "You don't understand," he rasped. "I have no choice." I demanded he let Lily go, screaming curses at him, but Jake only backed away, forcing Lily toward the altar. Ethan lunged, and for a brief, desperate second, he wrestled with Jake for control of the knife. Jake overpowered him. Blood dripped from Ethan's forearm where the blade had grazed him. In the chaos, Jake dragged Lily away, deeper into the trees. I heard her terrified yelp, and then her voice vanished, swallowed by the mountain's silence. Ethan and I chased after them, ignoring the sting of branches scraping our faces. The fog thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. We split up briefly, calling Lily's name. My throat tightened with dread, every nerve in my body screaming that we were in mortal danger. Seconds later, I heard Ethan cry out. I dashed toward the sound. When I found him, he was alone, but he was shaking all over, pointing to an open patch of ground. "I saw them," he gasped. "Jake, he took Lily through there. There's a cave or something." We found a narrow entrance beneath a rocky overhang, cloaked in hanging moss. My flashlight revealed roughly carved steps descending into darkness. The stale, damp air made me gag. Ethan and I pressed forward, hearts pounding. My mind raced, trying to understand why Jake would do this. Deep in that cave, the darkness was absolute. Our flashlights flickered, struggling against an unnatural gloom that swallowed the beams. Finally, we emerged into a chamber with walls dripping moisture. There, near the center, was Lily, bound and gagged with rope, eyes wide with terror. Jake stood beside her, muttering incantations in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. Anger fueled my rush forward. I swung my flashlight at Jake's head, catching him off guard. He staggered, but then something else emerged from the shadows, a figure that looked like a small child, but its eyes glowed with a predatory light. A suffocating sense of evil saturated the air. The child creature took a step, and an ear-splitting shriek filled the chamber. My vision blurred, and a blinding pain lanced through my temples. Ethan crumpled to his knees, screaming and clutching his head. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, forcing myself to stay upright. Jake's voice trembled as he addressed the being. "Azazel, I brought you what you wanted. Spare me, please, spare me." Azazel. I'd heard that name whispered in old legends about demons bound to certain places. Somehow Jake had struck a bargain with it, and we were the bargaining chips. My pulse hammered as Azazel's shrieking stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard Lily's muffled sobs. Ethan, still on his knees, reached for Jake's leg in a desperate attempt to pull him down. Jake kicked Ethan aside, but then froze, as if struggling with himself. Before I could move, Azazel flicked its inhuman eyes at Ethan, and Ethan's body went rigid. A cold wave swept through the cavern. Ethan rose to his feet in a jerky, unnatural motion, head lolling to the side like a marionette's. Possessed. "No," I croaked, barely above a whisper. My stomach churned as Ethan's eyes rolled back, turning milky white. He lunged at me without warning, swinging Jake's hunting knife in a brutal arc. I stumbled backward, crying out as the blade nicked my shoulder. Pain flared, but adrenaline took over, and I scrambled for footing. The cavern floor was slick. I slid, nearly falling as Ethan came at me again, the knife glinting in the uncertain light. Jake, momentarily free of Azazel's attention, rushed to Lily. He ripped off her gag, but instead of letting her go, he dragged her closer to the altar carved into the floor. "I'm sorry," he repeated, tears streaming down his face. "I did this to save my sister years ago. I had no choice." Lily fought, thrashing against the ropes, but Jake's grip was iron. I managed to dodge Ethan's next strike, though he grazed my arm, drawing blood. I was losing strength. My only advantage was that he moved stiffly, as though controlled by puppet strings. Summoning every ounce of will, I slammed into him with my shoulder, sending him sprawling. He hit the ground hard, and for a moment the possession seemed to waver. "Ethan, fight it!" I shouted, voice cracking. But a guttural snarl escaped his mouth and he rose again, eyes still white. Time stretched thin, my thoughts spinning. I needed to stop Jake from harming Lily, but Ethan blocked my way. Behind him, Azazel hovered near the altar, a horrifying grin on its childlike face. Just then, Lily managed to yank one arm free from the ropes. She clawed at Jake's face, forcing him to drop the knife. He roared in pain, clamping a hand over a bleeding scratch across his cheek. In that split second, Lily scrambled backward. Azazel hissed, fury contorting its youthful features. I darted forward, stumbling over the uneven floor. I snatched the dropped hunting knife, then turned to see Azazel gliding toward me. My skin prickled with an indescribable sense of malevolence. Jake lunged at Lily again, ignoring me. She screamed. With trembling hands, I slashed at the ropes binding her feet, freeing her. Jake tried to pull her away, but Lily kicked him, connecting with his knee. He buckled, crying out in pain. Azazel shrieked again, and Ethan let out an animalistic howl. He hurled himself at me, forcing me to drop the knife or risk being overpowered. We struggled, my boots slipping on the wet stone. Panic seized me when I felt Ethan's hands close around my throat. Darkness encroached on my vision as he squeezed. Before I lost consciousness, Lily tackled Ethan from behind, loosening his grip. I gasped for air, vision swimming. That's when I saw Jake. He had the knife now, and he stood behind Lily with trembling hands. With a wild look in his eyes, he raised the blade. "No!" I screamed, voice hoarse. I grabbed a rock from the cavern floor and hurled it as hard as I could. It struck Jake's wrist. He dropped the knife, letting out a hiss of pain. Lily spun around and kicked the weapon away. We were bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, but we were still alive for the moment. Azazel glided closer, its eyes shifting from Lily to me, as if deciding which of us to claim first. An unearthly cold permeated the air, and a wave of vertigo slammed into me, driving me to my knees. Jake scrambled backward, lips moving in soundless terror as he realized Azazel would not spare him. Something flickered in my mind. Images of the ancient symbols we saw carved into the stone outside. It was pure instinct, or maybe desperation, but I staggered to my feet and wiped sweat and blood from my brow. I tried to trace a similar symbol on the cavern wall with my blood, conjuring the faint memory of a banishing rite I had once read about in a library book on folklore. I had no clue if it would work, but it was our only chance. As I did, Azazel let out a chattering, guttural laugh that reverberated in my skull. Ethan collapsed, unconscious or freed from possession. Hard to tell which. Jake pressed himself against the far wall, eyes darting frantically, tears staining his cheeks. With trembling fingers, I completed the rough shape of a rune, repeating words under my breath that I could barely recall. Something in the air crackled, and Azazel's form flickered. It let out a tortured screech so loud that the cavern's walls vibrated. A burst of frigid wind whipped through the chamber, knocking me off balance. When I looked up, Azazel was gone. Whether banished or merely weakened, I couldn't say, but the suffocating sense of evil receded, allowing me to gasp in relief. All was silent except for our ragged breathing. Jake slid down the wall, clutching his head in his hands. Lily crawled to Ethan, checking for a pulse. "He's alive," she murmured, voice quavering. I hurried over to them, stifling a sob of relief when I confirmed Ethan was breathing, albeit shallowly. We limped out of the cave together, each supporting the other. Nobody spoke. The world outside was no less ominous. Dark clouds rolled overhead, and a piercing wind cut across the rocky slope. But being out of that wretched cavern felt like a blessing. Jake stumbled to his knees, retching. Lily glared at him, tears streaming. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you do this?" He coughed, spitting out bile. "I lost my sister here years ago. I made a deal with that thing to get her back, but she was already dead. It demanded more souls, kept me tied to this mountain." He looked at me with hollow eyes, tears carving tracks through the dirt on his face. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, but the demon said it would free me if I brought new sacrifices." Lily cursed him. I felt a mix of rage and pity. "You're a monster," she said under her breath. Jake only nodded, despair etched into every line of his face. The moment was shattered by Ethan stirring. He clutched his head, groaning. When he opened his eyes, they were normal again, but he trembled uncontrollably. What happened?" he rasped. I couldn't bring myself to explain. Instead, Lily helped him stand, and we all agreed to get off that mountain as fast as we could. Our supplies were scattered, some lost in the struggle. Ethan's arm was bleeding badly, and I had to tear strips from my shirt to bandage the wound. Jake trailed behind us, limping and silent. Despite Jake's attempts to guide us, we were hopelessly lost. The trails twisted in on themselves, and the fog seemed to mock our frantic desperation. Night descended again, forcing us to hole up in a shallow cave, though none of us dared to sleep deeply. I remember dozing fitfully, nightmares plagued by Azazel's eyes and the horrific shrieks echoing in my skull. When morning came, we forged ahead. Jake, still burdened by guilt, tried to direct us, but we kept returning to the same clearing. It felt like the mountain was alive, shifting beneath our feet to trap us. At one point, we glimpsed a helicopter in the distance. We waved, shouted, tried to send a flare from Ethan's kit, but the pilot never seemed to notice. I suspected the swirling mist blocked us from view. As the hours wore on, Lily grew frantic. She kept insisting she heard footsteps behind us, twigs snapping, a child's laughter echoing. I heard it too, though Jake claimed it was just the wind. Ethan said nothing, sometimes wincing as if in pain. I feared Azazel might still have its claws in him somehow, but we had no choice but to keep moving. Eventually, we stumbled upon an older trail with fading markers. We followed it blindly, praying it would lead us to safety. Late that evening, the mist lifted slightly, revealing a vantage point high above the surrounding valleys. Lights glimmered far below. Civilization. For the first time, hope sparked in my chest. If we could just get down there, maybe we could find help. But the mountain hadn't finished with us. Suddenly, Jake let out a strangled cry. I turned to see him kneeling on the ground, clutching his chest. He looked up at me with haunted eyes. "It's not letting me leave," he whispered. I can feel it. Come on." I reached for his arm, tried to pull him up. He lurched forward and shoved me away with surprising force. Lily hissed in pain as she stumbled backward, nearly tumbling off a rocky drop. Jake's eyes rolled back. His body jerked, as if Azazel's presence had returned. Then, with a ragged scream, he pitched backward over the edge. We heard his body crash onto the rocks below, and then there was nothing but silence. Lily sank to her knees, sobbing. Ethan turned away, eyes hollow. I stood there, numb, unable to process yet another horror. It must have been near dawn by the time we located a rough footpath leading down the mountain. The air felt slightly warmer, and the stifling sense of malevolence lessened with each step. When we finally reached the base, the three of us looked like we'd crawled out of a war zone, scraped, bloody, and half-crazed from exhaustion. We flagged down a ranger's truck on a dirt road, collapsing as soon as he stepped out. He rushed to radio for help, and eventually a small convoy of officials arrived. park rangers, local sheriffs, and, to our surprise, a group of stern-faced men who introduced themselves as part of an FBI field office. That's when things turned strange. We gave disjointed accounts of what had happened: the possession, the carved symbols, Jake's betrayal, Lily's kidnapping, the cave. The FBI officers traded unreadable looks, then ushered us into separate vehicles. They asked us to keep quiet about the specifics until they could conduct a thorough investigation. It all felt off. They loaded us into ambulances for medical checks, and I remember drifting in and out of consciousness as the adrenaline crash finally took its toll. A week later, Lily and I tried to follow up with local authorities. The official story was that an unexpected storm led to a search and rescue operation, that we were found suffering from hypothermia and disorientation. No mention was made of a demon, a cave, or a guide named Jake Martinez. The FBI presence was never acknowledged publicly. Even Ethan's blog footage disappeared from his hard drives, replaced with corrupted files. The short public statement read, 3 hikers were treated for dehydration and minor injuries after going off trail at Devil's Backbone. No outstanding persons remain missing. That was it. No mention of Jake's body. No mention of what we really saw. For a while, Lily and I tried to press further, but we got stonewalled at every turn. Each inquiry led to a polite but firm dismissal. The more we pushed, the more resistance we faced. Eventually, Lily decided to move out of state, haunted by nightmares she couldn't shake. Ethan rarely spoke of it again, convinced that some unstoppable power had erased the truth. As for me, I couldn't let go of the memories. I returned to Devil's Backbone alone, months later, in a misguided attempt at closure. The paths were different, or maybe I was different. At times, I could almost sense eyes watching me from behind the trees. I never found the cave or any trace of Jake's remains. It was as if the mountain had swallowed up every shred of evidence. I believe Azazel isn't gone, merely waiting for the next wanderer lured by the promise of adventure or redemption. And I know the demon's hold on me might never truly be broken. The nights when the fog rolls in, I dream of that wretched cave and the possessed eyes of my friend. When I close my eyes, I still hear the sound of a child's laughter echoing off those ancient stones. I've told you everything, though part of me wishes I hadn't. Even now, I can feel the mountain's dark pull. Some nights, I wake from a nightmare convinced I'm standing again at the edge of that altar, hearing Lily's screams and Jake's pleading voice. I remember how it felt when Azazel looked right into me, like it knew every secret fear I harbored. If you believe a word of this, then heed my warning. Devil's Backbone is not just another challenging hike. The mountain demands its tribute, and sometimes the price is more than a life. It's your soul. I survived, but the best parts of me never returned. In the end, I think that's what the demon wanted. And if you ever see that eerie figure of a child standing just beyond the fog, turn back. Turn back and pray it doesn't follow you home. Story 3. My name is Ethan Carter, and I am 29 years old. This all happened in the spring of 2025, when I decided to spend a month off the grid at Crowder's Mountain, North Carolina. I've always been drawn to the outdoors, and as a freelance photographer, I figured I could capture some stunning images while clearing my mind of the usual digital noise. I planned the trip with my girlfriend, Maya Rodriguez, who is 27, along with my closest friend, Liam Brooks, 29, his acquaintance, Sophie Turner, 26, and my buddy, Jake Miller, 28. We wanted to document wildlife, hike secluded trails, and share the experience as a small group seeking adventure. I remember the day we arrived. The sky was a radiant blue, and the rugged silhouette of a Crowder's Mountain rose sharply against the horizon. We parked in a gravel lot and shouldered our heavy packs, heading toward a secluded area of the park most people never venture into. The plan was to remain off-grid, meaning no cell phones or easy rescues if trouble arose. In hindsight, that was our first mistake. Our second mistake was underestimating the harshness of the environment. Our tents were cheap models Liam found on sale, and we quickly realized they wouldn't hold up well if the weather turned. We had some GPS devices, but the signals were spotty at best. Jake had a drone and fancy tech gear, but all of it felt useless when we realized how dense the forest was. At first, though, these seemed like small hiccups in an otherwise exciting adventure. The first few days went smoothly enough. We camped under the stars, took early morning hikes, and admired breathtaking views from rocky overlooks. At night, we'd gather around a modest campfire, sharing stories and the occasional beer. Despite some bug bites and mild hunger pangs, the trip felt liberating. Things began to change around the third day. We discovered odd carvings on the bark of trees near our camp, strange symbols arranged in intricate patterns. Sophie, studying anthropology and Appalachian folklore, said the markings could be associated with witchcraft, maybe local legends. Liam just laughed it off, claiming it was probably a prank by high school kids or bored hikers. Maya looked uneasy but didn't say much. I'll admit, I felt a pinch of dread. Something about the carvings made my skin crawl, but I brushed it aside. That night, my camera malfunctioned for the first time. In the past, it had held up on snowy peaks and dusty deserts without fail, but the lens stuck, refusing to focus. Jake's drone also started acting up, randomly losing its GPS signal mid-flight. We joked about electromagnetic interference, but a pit in my stomach told me there was more to it. On the fourth day, the weirdness escalated. I woke just before sunrise to photograph a clearing. As I peered through my lens, I caught a fleeting shape in the distance. It looked almost human, but it moved too quickly, fading behind the trees like a ripple of black cloth. When I reviewed the photos, I saw only a blurred streak. I told the others, but they seemed to brush it off, everyone except Sophie. She got this strange look, like she believed me, but was afraid to say so. That evening, we ventured into a nearby grove to collect firewood. We ran into a local man with a long beard and piercing eyes. He wore tattered overalls and warned us about straying too far from the main trails. "Mountain's got its secrets," he said in a voice that prickled my skin. "You best not stir up what sleeps here." Then he vanished back into the woods. We couldn't shake his words. Liam made a joke about movie cliches, but the rest of us didn't laugh. Over the next few days, subtle things kept going wrong. Our food supply ran lower than expected, though we were sure we'd rationed correctly. Some of our equipment disappeared. Small stuff like flashlights or extra batteries. We blamed carelessness at first, until we found a single boot print in the mud near our tents that didn't match any of ours. At night, we heard rustling in the bushes. It could have been animals, but it felt like eyes were watching us from the darkness. One day, the tension in the group boiled over. We were struggling to decide whether to move camp or head back for better supplies. Liam wanted to hike deeper, convinced that we'd find pristine spots for climbing and photography. Maya worried about safety, noticing cuts and bruises on her legs from rough terrain. Jake argued that his drone was useless without a stable signal, so he wanted to find higher ground. Sophie tried to be the peacekeeper, but she was spooked by the witchcraft symbols. And me? I was torn. I craved the perfect photo, but I also recognized the risk. The argument ended with a plan to stick it out a bit longer, but the strain was clear. On the 10th night, Liam decided to slip away. I don't know if he intended to make some epic social media post or just prove how fearless he was, but he never told us. I woke up in the middle of the night, noticing his sleeping bag was empty. Sunrise came, and he still wasn't back. We searched the surrounding area, calling his name until our throats were raw. By midday, we found his pack at the edge of a ravine, half buried in leaves. No sign of him, except for a small streak of blood on the fabric. Maya looked at me, eyes wide with dread. Sophie went pale. Jake just stood there, silent and trembling. We followed a faint blood trail deeper into the forest. The more we pressed on, the more the landscape changed. The trees grew closer together, and a strange hush fell over everything, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. Eventually, we stumbled upon a rocky overhang that led to a narrow path descending into darkness. That's when Maya screamed. A figure slipped from behind a boulder and rushed us. Someone thin, with wild hair, dressed in rags. Their face was contorted, eyes blank with madness. They carried a crude knife fashioned from a jagged piece of metal. We scrambled back, but the figure lunged at Jake, swiping across his arm. He yelped in pain, falling to the ground, and the attacker yanked him away faster than I could react. Maya and I tried to give chase, but it was chaos. Sophie tried to keep up, but she tripped on a root and fell hard on her wrist. By the time we reached a clearing, Jake was gone, dragged off into the woods, leaving a trail of disturbed leaves and droplets of blood. We found him hours later, well after the sun had set, or at least we found where they'd taken him. An opening in the side of the mountain, partially concealed by undergrowth, led to a small cavern. Inside, half-burned candles flickered, illuminating cryptic symbols painted on the walls. It reeked of decay and damp soil. In the center of the cavern was a stone slab, and atop it, Jake lay unconscious, hands bound. Standing next to him was a woman shrouded in dark cloth. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles and scars, her eyes reflecting a milky glow in the candlelight. She chanted in a low, guttural tone. Every instinct told me to run, but fear for Jake anchored me in place. Maya and Sophie clutched my arms. In a trembling whisper, I told them we had to rescue him. We moved in unison, stepping over crumbled stones. The woman, no, the witch, turned to face us, her lips pulling back in a sneer. A sudden wave of air slammed us against the cavern walls, as though an invisible force had grabbed us. I felt pain shoot through my shoulder. Maya gasped for breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophie let out a strangled cry. Somehow, I managed to lift my head, meeting the witch's gaze. Her eyes, cloudy like dead fish, seemed to peer straight into my soul. The chanting grew louder, echoing in the small cave. My mind swam with confusion. I saw fleeting images. Liam tied to a tree, battered and bleeding. Jake screaming while that wild, ragged figure from earlier brandished a blade. Then, from behind me, Sophie let out a guttural sound. Not fear, but something dark and unfamiliar. She rose from where she had been pinned, moving jerkily as though strings controlled her limbs. Her eyes rolled back, and her voice took on a resonance that wasn't hers. The witch turned her focus to Sophie, and in that moment, I understood. Sophie was possessed. She lunged at Maya, grappling her with unnatural strength. Maya tried to wrestle free, but Sophie pinned her to the ground, choking her. I shouted for Sophie to stop, but the words died in my throat. She lifted a sharp rock and brought it down with a sickening thud. The horror of that moment still feels like a nightmare. Maya's body went limp, a crimson pool blossoming beneath her. I roared in anguish, adrenaline surging as I lunged forward. A wave of rage or terror, maybe both, snapped the witch's hold over me just long enough to knock Sophie aside. She tumbled across the cavern floor, moaning. My mind reeled, stuck between heartbreak and fury. The witch's chanting grew frenzied, the shadows flickering across the walls like dancing specters. I staggered to Jake, freeing his hands, but he was delirious, barely able to stand. Sophie, wide-eyed and shaking, seemed to break free of her possession. She looked down at Maya's body, a tremor of disbelief passing across her face. Before she could say anything, the witch let out a hideous shriek. The cavern walls quivered, and stones started to rain from the ceiling. We fled, half carrying Jake, but not before the witch hurled another burst of force. It struck Sophie square in the back, and she collapsed. I tried to reach her, but the ceiling gave way, sealing the entrance with a cloud of dust and falling rocks. I heard her scream cut short, and she vanished behind the rubble. I thought I glimpsed the old hag's face, twisted into a triumphant sneer, as the stone barrier slammed between us. Jake and I stumbled out into the night, coughing from the dust, tears streaming down my face. Rage and devastation coursed through me. I had lost Maya. Liam was missing. Sophie was trapped, or worse, Jake was barely conscious. In the faint moonlight, I saw blood seeping from a slash on his side, another wound from our savage attackers or from the witch's power. We needed help. We needed to get out of those woods before the witch or her followers came after us again. With trembling hands, I got Jake's arm around my shoulder, and we navigated through twisted paths. The forest seemed different at night, an endless maze. The symbols carved into trees seemed to glow faintly, mocking us. I kept seeing shadows darting between the pines, hearing whispers that set my nerves aflame. It felt like hours before we found the main trail leading toward civilization. Jake collapsed, delirious with fever. I dragged him until we reached a ranger station near dawn. The staff on duty took one look at us, dirty, bleeding, haunted, and scrambled to call the authorities. An ambulance rushed Jake away, but he kept ranting about a witch, about a cave of horrors, about Sophie possessed. The next day, men in dark suits arrived at the hospital. They flashed badges too quickly for me to read. FBI, maybe. They asked me question after question about what we'd seen, about any cults or supernatural phenomena. I told them everything, half in a stupor of grief. Their expressions remained inscrutable. When I asked if they had found Liam or Sophie, they said they had leads but offered no specifics. A week passed. I stayed near the base of Crowder's Mountain, bouncing between cheap motels and half-hearted attempts to comb the area with local search parties. The official line was that Liam and Sophie were missing hikers, that Maya died in a tragic accident. But there were rumors swirling among the locals, whispers of an old presence that had haunted those woods for generations. Some claimed the FBI had discovered ritual sites, bodies marked with strange symbols, even archaic texts, but the public was kept in the dark. A hush of secrecy surrounded every official statement. Determined to learn the truth, I returned to the area on my own, ignoring the pleas of friends who said I should let it go. Armed with a flashlight, fresh climbing gear, and a heart full of anger, I located that hidden cavern entrance. It took 2 days of carefully retracing our steps. I found partial cave-ins, scorched tree trunks, and more of those cryptic carvings. My body ached from exhaustion, but vengeance pushed me forward. When I squeezed through a narrow gap, I recognized the same candle stubs, the same symbols on the walls. It smelled of rotting flesh and damp stone. My throat tightened at the memory of Maya's last moments. In the flicker of my flashlight, I saw fresh footprints. Someone still moved through this place. I crept farther into the darkness, eventually reaching a cavernous chamber. At the center stood the witch, a black silhouette, her eyes reflecting a milky hatred. She hissed at me, and I felt that same invisible force slam into my chest, driving me to my knees. My flashlight flew from my hand, the beam skittering across the wall. I coughed, gasping for air. This time, though, I was prepared for the pain. I forced myself to look at her. In my pocket was an old page of notes Sophie had written about local folklore, an Appalachian ritual that supposedly could banish malevolent spirits. I had memorized every line. I shouted the words, half believing them and half praying for a miracle. The witch recoiled, screeching like an enraged banshee. The cavern's walls began to tremble, and dust fell from the ceiling in thick clouds. The temperature dropped sharply, and I saw my breath in the dim light. Pain coursed through my body as if every nerve was on fire, but I didn't stop chanting. Then, behind the witch, I noticed a figure collapsed against the wall. Liam. His skin was pale, his wrists raw and bloody from rope burns. He was alive, but barely. My heart hammered in my chest. I crawled toward him, but the witch raised her arms, chanting in a language that sounded older than the earth itself. A sudden rush of energy erupted from her fingertips, slamming me to the ground. My vision blurred with tears. The stone floor was cold beneath me. Summoning whatever strength I had left, I continued Sophie's ritual. The witch shrieked again, a twisted wail of anger and fear. An unholy wind whipped around the chamber. Stones and debris rattled. My voice cracked, but I forced the final words out, each syllable like glass in my throat. A deafening roar echoed through the cavern, and the witch's form convulsed as though pulled by invisible chains. Her eyes blazed with malevolence. With one last cry, she staggered backward, her silhouette flickering in the half-light before collapsing into a pile of black rags. I felt the ground lurch beneath me, and a cascade of rocks came tumbling down. I crawled to Liam, shaking him. His eyes fluttered open, filled with desperation. He tried to speak, but only managed to gurgle. Then the cave ceiling shuddered, and a large boulder cracked from above, slamming onto my legs. White-hot pain shot through my body, and a roar of agony tore from my throat. Liam tried to reach out, but I saw his eyes roll back. Whether from shock or fatigue, I don't know. He slipped into unconsciousness. I tried to move, but I couldn't. Everything was pinned from the waist down. Dust clogged my nostrils. My lungs burned. Rocks continued to fall. I heard an unearthly moan, as if the mountain itself was wounded. The last thing I saw was the flicker of my flashlight bouncing off the cavern walls. A figure, maybe the witch's spirit, slithered into the darkness, refusing to be fully banished. My breath came in ragged bursts, my consciousness waning. It was hours, or maybe days, later when I woke, drifting in and out of delirium. Men were in the cave, wearing heavy uniforms. I saw bright beams of flashlights, heard metallic clanks as they lifted rocks. Their voices were low. FBI, I thought, or something more secretive. I tried to speak, but my throat produced nothing but a dry rasp. They noticed me. One of them knelt, shining a light in my eyes. I glimpsed the crest on his jacket, but couldn't read it. I tried to point to Liam, to beg them to help him, but I blacked out again. When I came to, I was on a stretcher. My legs were numb, heavily bandaged. I heard their hushed conversation. Make sure the locals don't find out. We have to contain this. The media can't get wind of these ritual sites. I mustered the strength to whisper, "What about Liam? Sophie?" But someone jabbed me with a needle, and everything faded to black. Weeks passed in a blur of hospital walls and terse, controlled visits by men in suits who asked more questions than they answered. They wanted details, every last word of Sophie's notes, the location of the cave, descriptions of the witch. They asked about a reclusive cult, about missing persons. Each time, they left me more disoriented, never giving clear information in return. The final time they came, they quietly informed me that Liam's remains had been found near the cave, that he hadn't made it. They showed no interest in confirming anything about Sophie's fate. It felt like the authorities had a narrative to stick to, one that didn't involve a living Sophie Turner or talk of possessions and witches. Jake, I learned, was in another hospital, recovering from surgery and trauma. They kept him separated. I haven't seen him since we escaped that cave. I'm not sure if he even survived the entire ordeal. The official report states Maya's death was a tragic accident during a hiking trip. Nothing more. No mention of my camera's footage, the cult, or the witch. They said it was for public safety, but to me, it felt like a cover-up. Now, as I sit here in a wheelchair by a window overlooking a parking lot, I replay every moment in my mind. I wonder if anything could have gone differently. The nightmares still plague me, memories of that frantic chase, of Sophie's possessed eyes, of Maya's last breath. And, worst of all, the lingering sense that the witch wasn't truly destroyed. She merely slipped into the shadows, biding her time until the next foolhardy travelers stumble into her domain. I've learned that Crowder's Mountain has held dark secrets for generations. Locals whisper of curses and sightings, of a malevolent presence that claims unlucky souls. My story won't change that. The only difference now is that a few more of us have fallen victim to the mountain's ancient evil. The suits have made sure it stays off the news. Life outside moves on, unaware of the horrors lurking in those woods. As for me, I'm left with shattered legs, haunted dreams, and a broken heart. Part of me wants to expose the truth, to warn the world about what's out there. But who would believe a man ravaged by grief, with a story straight out of a nightmare? If I speak out, I risk my own safety. Those men in suits made that very clear. So I remain silent, for now. I am Ethan Carter, 29 years old, survivor of Crowder's Mountain in name only. I lost my friends, my love, and pieces of my soul in that cursed place. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about the witch's final shriek, the way the cavern trembled as if the earth itself were alive. I wonder if her spirit roams those trails even now, waiting to ensnare the next unsuspecting camper. And I wonder if the FBI or whoever they were truly contained the threat, or if they merely tucked it away beneath a veil of bureaucratic secrecy. All I know is that nightmares don't stay buried forever, especially not in the ancient haunted wilderness of Crowder's Mountain. If you ever find yourself there, consider the symbols carved into the trees a warning. And if you hear chanting in the wind or see a flicker of black cloth among the pines, turn back, because once you step into her domain, the witch's curse might claim you too, and no force of man or law will be able to save you. Story 4. My name is Alex Harper, and I'm 28 years old. This happened a little over a year ago, during a time when I thought escaping into the solitude of the wild would help me find inspiration for a new novel. Instead, I found something else, something darker and far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I was in a rough spot creatively, struggling to put words on paper. My best friend, Lily Thompson, suggested a trip to Mount Mitchell in North Carolina, an area known for its stunning vistas and dense forests. The plan was to spend a couple of weeks away from everything. No phones, no laptops, just notebooks, pens, and the wilderness. Maybe, I thought, the crisp mountain air would shake something loose in my writer's mind. Lily, 27, was all about adventure. Where I found comfort in quiet, Lily thrived on challenge. She was skilled in basic survival techniques, had taken a few wilderness courses, and had a confidence about nature I always envied. We decided to hire a local guide, Ethan Walker, for the first few days. I found him in an online forum. He claimed to know the hidden trails on Mount Mitchell better than anyone and promised a unique experience off the beaten path. I remember the day we arrived at the base of Mount Mitchell. The air felt different, heavy almost. A park ranger had warned us about unpredictable weather and wildlife, but there was also this strange undercurrent of caution in her voice. She said, "You two be careful out there. Lots of old stories about this place." I chalked it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. Lily teased me about looking nervous, and I forced a laugh to hide my unease. We met Ethan near the visitor center's parking area. Tall, lean, with a face half hidden behind a scruffy beard, he offered a polite smile and a handshake. He was surprisingly quiet at first, but as we set off, he began telling us about old legends. Curses, ghosts, and even creatures that supposedly roamed the high slopes. The way he spoke made it seem like he half believed them himself. Our gear was basic but sufficient. Tent, sleeping bags, some cooking equipment, and enough food for at least 10 days. We carried a small solar charger for emergencies, but Lily insisted on leaving behind most electronics to fully disconnect. We each had a compass and a map, though Ethan assured us we wouldn't need them much with his guidance. That would be our first mistake, trusting him implicitly. On the first night, we made camp beneath a canopy of towering pines. The area was eerily quiet. No owls hooting, no insects humming, just the rustling of leaves under a gentle breeze. Sitting by the campfire, Ethan told us about a local legend involving doppelgangers. He claimed that somewhere along the rugged slopes of Mount Mitchell, there was a place touched by a dark magic. Those who wandered there risked encountering a sinister version of themselves, a double that would mimic them in every way, except one crucial detail: it was evil. I remember laughing awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood, but Lily shot me a look that said she was taking it more seriously. Still, we both tried to brush it off as just another campfire story. We didn't know then how real that story would become. In the morning, we noticed something odd. Symbols were carved into the trunks of a few nearby trees, circles with strange intersecting lines. Lily asked if it could be some kind of code, or maybe just graffiti left by past hikers. Ethan shrugged, then said it might be related to local witchcraft rumors. He explained that in certain forbidden corners of Mount Mitchell, people supposedly performed dark rituals to summon or control these doppelgangers. It was all so bizarre, yet he spoke about it with a calm familiarity that unnerved me. By the third day, we hiked deeper into the forest, following narrow trails that snaked between massive boulders. The air turned colder, clouds looming overhead in the afternoon sky. Our first major issue arose when both Lily's and my compasses started spinning erratically. Thinking it was just an electromagnetic quirk of the area, we relied on Ethan's sense of direction to keep moving. I also tried to use my GPS once, but the device refused to pick up any signal. Late that afternoon, we set up camp near a rocky outcrop. That night, while Lily slept, I awoke to a soft crackling in the underbrush. I sat up, adrenaline rushing, and grabbed a flashlight. Just beyond the edge of our camp, I saw myself. The figure stood facing me, the flashlight beam revealing every detail. My face, my jacket, even my slightly hunched posture. But its eyes were cold, distant, lacking any spark of recognition or warmth. It was as if I was staring into a mirror that reflected only emptiness. I blinked in disbelief. The figure vanished into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. I spent the rest of that night in a restless vigil, heart pounding, half convinced I'd had a nightmare. When I told Lily and Ethan about it in the morning, Lily took it seriously while Ethan's expression darkened. He asked me exactly what I'd seen, then started murmuring about how we'd gone too far off the usual trails. I felt a twinge of anger, questioning why he brought us here if he suspected danger. But Lily and I decided to stick with him, trusting that we'd be fine if we stayed together. That was the day everything fell apart. We'd been hiking for about 6 hours. The terrain grew more challenging. Steep inclines, rocky paths made slick by a light drizzle. Suddenly, Ethan said he wanted to show us something special, a hidden overlook with a view of the entire valley. Lily hesitated, but I, trying to be open-minded, agreed. We followed him along a faint trail that curved through dense thickets. The trees were so thick that sunlight barely penetrated. When we emerged into a small clearing, everything was off. My gut told me to turn around, but it was too late. Standing in a semicircle around us were 4 strangers, all wearing dark outdoor gear. Their faces were partially concealed by hoods, and they were holding odd symbols, small metal talismans with the same circles and lines we had seen carved into the trees. Ethan spoke calmly, addressing them by name, though I only caught snippets. "We're ready, and the vessel is here." My blood ran cold. Lily and I exchanged a panicked glance. We realized in that moment we'd been lured into a trap. Ethan motioned to 2 of the hooded figures, and they lunged at Lily before I could react. She screamed, trying to fight back, but they overpowered her. I rushed forward only to feel a sharp blow to the back of my head. Dazed, I dropped to my knees, my vision swimming. I vaguely recall Lily being dragged away, pleading for help. My world spun, and then everything went dark. I woke to darkness, a suffocating blackness broken only by the faint glow of moonlight. My head throbbed and my hands were bound behind my back with rough rope. Gritting my teeth, I managed to get onto my feet. My backpack was gone. The only thing I still had was the battered flashlight in my coat pocket, probably overlooked in the confusion.
If you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment.
Where had
See
they
you in
taken
the next
her?
videos.
Cautiously, I stumbled through the trees until I found what looked like a narrow path. I had no real direction, only a desperate need to save my friend. At some point, my flashlight beam fell upon fresh footprints in the muddy ground. There were several sets, as if a group had passed through recently, dragging something. Clutching the flashlight with my bound hands, I followed them deeper into the forest. The wind carried faint echoes of chanting, a low hum that seemed to rise and fall like a heartbeat. Fear pumped through my veins. I edged closer until I saw a decrepit cabin perched on a rocky ledge. Light from within flickered against the windows. That chanting was coming from inside. I crept to the cabin's side, pressing my ear to the aging wooden walls. Lily's muffled cries sent a jolt of panic through me. I risked a glance through a cracked window. Lily was tied to a chair, eyes wide, gag in her mouth. Surrounding her stood Ethan and the 4 hooded figures. On a small table lay a metal bowl inscribed with the same bizarre symbols. The group's murmured chanting resonated in the cramped space. Heart hammering, I realized I needed a plan. But my body was trembling, and my bound hands felt useless. I tested the rope, trying to work my wrists free. A few minutes of focused struggle, and it loosened enough to slip my left hand out. As soon as my hands were free, I started searching for a way inside. The old cabin had a back entrance, a flimsy door secured by a rusty latch. I inched it open, praying the creaking hinges wouldn't give me away. Inside, the chanting was louder, echoing off the walls. I could smell burning herbs, a pungent, acrid odor that made my eyes water. A few paces down a cramped corridor, I spotted an open doorway leading into the main room. I heard Ethan's voice, calm yet forceful. Her energy will guide the doppelganger to its host. It's time. My stomach churned. Was Lily to be sacrificed? I refused to let that happen. Biting back terror, I grabbed a loose piece of wood from the floor, an improvised weapon. Then I burst into the room. For a second, everyone froze. Lily's eyes widened and she let out a muffled cry of relief through her gag. The hooded figures recovered quickly. 2 lunged for me. I swung the plank wildly, connecting with someone's shoulder. They stumbled back, gasping in pain. Ethan shouted, "Stop him!" His eyes flicked to mine and a cruel smirk twisted his features. Fury and betrayal flooded me. I feinted left, then darted right, narrowly avoiding a grasping hand. Another figure attempted to block me, but I barreled past, toppling a small table that held the metal bowl. It clattered to the floor, spilling the strange herbs and liquid across the dusty planks. With the circle broken, the chanting faltered. I used the distraction to reach Lily. Her eyes were wet with tears, but I saw relief there. I tore at the ropes binding her until they came loose. Before I could pull her to her feet, hands clamped down on my shoulders. A brutal punch landed on my back, driving the air from my lungs. I heard Lily scream. Ethan grabbed Lily by the wrist, dragging her toward a door at the opposite side of the cabin. I tried to stand, but one of the hooded figures kicked me in the ribs. Pain flared through my side. Groaning, I looked up just in time to see Ethan disappearing outside with Lily. Gathering what little strength I had left, I lashed out with my makeshift plank, knocking one of my attackers off balance. They crashed into another figure, tangling themselves, giving me a precious moment to scramble to my feet. I bolted through the door, ignoring the agony in my ribs. Outside, the moonlit forest was a tangle of shadows. A chilly wind whipped at my face, and I could just make out Ethan and Lily disappearing into the darkness. She was resisting, planting her feet, trying to slow him down, but Ethan was stronger. I forced myself into a desperate sprint. Following them through the maze of trees, I called Lily's name. She managed to kick at Ethan, causing him to stumble. I closed the gap. He spun around, an unearthly rage on his face. He muttered something about the doppelganger needing a host, and how Lily was critical to completing the ritual. My mind reeled. Why Lily? What did he want from her? There was no time for questions. I had to act. I lunged at Ethan, slamming into him. The impact sent all 3 of us tumbling down a short embankment. We crashed onto a patch of muddy ground. I scrambled up, ignoring the taste of blood in my mouth. Lily wrestled free of Ethan's grasp, and I grabbed her hand. Together, we ran blindly until we could no longer see or hear the chanting or the hooded figures behind us. When we finally slowed, we were far into the forest, with no idea where we were. Lily was trembling, tears streaking her dirty face. I pulled her into a quick hug, my heart hammering. We could still hear distant shouts, but the voices seemed to be moving in another direction. Under the pale moonlight, I noticed a small path, scarcely visible through thick undergrowth. We had little choice but to follow it, hoping it led somewhere safe, or at least away from Ethan's group. The path twisted and turned until it emerged at another old, weathered cabin. This one looked abandoned and partially collapsed. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung crooked on rusted hinges. We had no alternative, so we ducked inside. The interior was musty and cluttered with old newspapers, rotting chairs, and broken shelves. Our flashlight was dying, casting weak, flickering beams across the debris. There, in a corner, we discovered a collection of moldy, handwritten journals. They were filled with sketches of runes, descriptions of rituals, and references to shadow selves and mirrors of the soul. By the flashlight's feeble glow, Lily and I pieced together fragments of the text. It seemed a long-dead hermit had once inhabited this place and researched the legend of doppelgangers. One entry explained how dark magic on Mount Mitchell could create an evil reflection of a person, but only if certain rituals were performed. The text hinted at a way to break the bond if it had already formed, an act of confronting one's own darkness and severing the link with the reflection. The next few hours were agonizing. We heard footsteps outside at one point, but they faded away. Huddled together for warmth, Lily and I managed to snatch brief moments of restless sleep. My mind was still spinning with everything that had happened. Ethan's betrayal, the hooded figures, the doppelganger I'd seen in the trees. Despite the danger, I felt a surge of determination. We had made it this far, and I couldn't abandon hope of escaping and exposing whatever was happening on this cursed mountain. At first light, we emerged cautiously. Every step we took seemed amplified by the oppressive silence around us. Our plan was simple: find a path out, get to safety, and contact the authorities. However, the deeper we moved into the forest, the more I noticed subtle changes. Shapes flickered in the corner of my vision but vanished when I turned my head. Once, I thought I glimpsed Lily's figure walking behind me, but when I looked back, Lily was actually several yards ahead. It wasn't long before we realized the doppelganger phenomenon wasn't just affecting me. Lily gasped at one point, pointing to a figure standing among the pines, a perfect replica of her, mimicking her posture. Then it turned its head in a sharp, unnatural motion, revealing a face devoid of warmth. A wave of dread washed over me. If these reflections were multiplying, we were in even worse trouble. We pressed onward, eventually finding a dirt track that led down a slope. Our relief was short-lived. A battered Jeep tore around a bend, screeching to a halt beside us. Out stepped two men in plain clothes, though one flashed an FBI badge. For a moment, hope flared in me. We were saved. Then the men exchanged wary glances, stepping closer as if we were criminals. They asked if we were the missing hikers from Mount Mitchell. We frantically explained about the cult, the kidnapping, and the doppelgangers. Their expressions hardened. One agent muttered, "Let's take them in." Something about their demeanor felt off. They weren't asking us further questions about the cult. Instead, they insisted we get in the Jeep, that we'd be safer in custody. Lily and I exchanged a worried look. Something in the pit of my stomach warned me that these men might not be entirely on our side. But faced with the possibility of running again, exhausted and bruised, we had no choice. We got into the Jeep, hoping to be taken to a field office or a local police station. Instead, they drove us back up a winding road that led deeper into the mountains, eventually stopping at a desolate park building. They ushered us into a small back room lit by a single overhead bulb. One agent locked the door while the others started asking questions. Pointed, aggressive questions about what exactly we'd seen, who we'd told, and if anyone else knew. Lily asked about calling her family. The agent shook his head, ignoring the request. At that moment, my mind flicked to my sister, Sarah Mitchell Harper. She was supposed to check in with me if she didn't hear back after a week. If we never came back, I knew Sarah would come looking. Something about the way the agents kept glancing at each other made it clear they wanted to contain this incident, not investigate it. Perhaps they already knew about the cult's activities, or the legends of Mount Mitchell, and were determined to cover it all up. The next few hours were a blur of threats and intimidation. When we tried to mention the doppelgangers, they dismissed it as hysteria from exhaustion. Eventually, we were left in the locked room. Time slipped by, minutes feeling like hours. Lily whispered that we needed to escape, but the walls were solid cinder block and the only door was locked tight. We heard low voices outside, footsteps coming and going. Then a loud commotion erupted, a scream, a crash, and the overhead lights flickered out. In the dark, Lily and I scrambled to the door, pressing our ears to the metal. Another scream, then an eerie silence. A key rattled in the lock and the door swung open. Standing there in the dim corridor was a silhouette. At first I thought it was one of the agents, but as it moved closer, I realized it was Sarah, my sister. She looked frantic. "Alex, I've been looking everywhere for you." I rushed forward, hugging her, relief and confusion swirling inside me. She explained in broken gasps how she'd come to Mount Mitchell after not hearing from me, only to stumble upon a chaotic FBI scene. She'd seen an opportunity when one of the agents left his keys and took it to find us. While Lily and I were reeling with shock, Sarah urged us to go, warning that we didn't have much time. We followed her through the corridors. Bodies of federal agents lay slumped against walls as if something had torn through them. My stomach churned and Lily clutched my hand. Was this Ethan's group? The doppelgangers? I had no idea, but we needed to escape first, question later. We made it outside. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in a dull gray light. Sarah led us to a side parking lot where her rental car was parked. We piled in, and she sped away down the winding mountain road. My heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through me. All I could think about was putting Mount Mitchell as far behind us as possible. We never got that chance. Halfway down the mountain, the doppelganger phenomenon struck again. Lily yelped and pointed at the road ahead. In the pale morning light stood a figure that looked exactly like Sarah, right in front of our speeding car. The real Sarah slammed on the brakes, swerving to avoid hitting it. We careened into a ditch, the car's front end smashing into a tree. Dazed, I shook my head and unbuckled my seatbelt. Sarah was unconscious at the wheel, and Lily groaned, clutching her arm. Smoke billowed from the hood. I forced the door open and stumbled out, calling Sarah's name. Then I saw her door was wide open and she was gone. My stomach dropped. I called for her, but there was no response. Lily limped out, her arm injured. Together, we searched the immediate area, yelling Sarah's name. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air, leaving only footprints leading away from the crashed car. 2 sets of footprints, actually, hers and a second, identical set. The doppelganger. My heart twisted with fear and rage. Had Sarah's double lured her away? Hours passed as Lily and I searched for Sarah, weaving through the forest. We found no sign of her, only the occasional scuff in the dirt or broken branches. At some point, we heard distant sirens. More official vehicles arrived, men in dark suits stepping out. Terrified of another cover-up or confrontation, we hid among the trees, watching as they towed away Sarah's rental car and scoured the wreck site. They moved with cold efficiency, gathering evidence but never calling out for survivors or announcing any rescue mission. It was a cleanup operation, pure and simple. Realizing there was no help coming from them, Lily and I used the confusion to slip farther down the mountain. We eventually found our way onto a lonely side road, where a passing truck driver pulled over. We spun a hasty story about a hiking accident and asked for a ride to the nearest town. Exhausted and desperate, we told each other that we'd find Sarah as soon as we got help. Days later, safely holed up in a cheap motel, Lily and I tried to contact local law enforcement. Rangers, even the state police. Our story was met with skepticism or outright dismissal. We were told that the FBI had already completed an investigation, that any mention of cults and doppelgangers was unfounded rumor. No official record of Sarah's disappearance existed. It was as though she had been erased. One night, Lily, exhausted from the ordeal, tried to comfort me with the idea that Sarah might still be alive somewhere, that maybe she had escaped. But my heart felt heavy with guilt and a mounting certainty that something unnatural had taken her. We resolved to keep searching to uncover the truth, but we were blocked at every turn. Files sealed, witnesses silent. The closer we got to the real story, the more we realized how deep the cover-up ran. In the weeks that followed, I found myself experiencing strange flickers in my peripheral vision, as though someone was standing behind me whenever I glanced in a mirror or a reflective window. I'd whirl around, only to find empty air. Yet every so often I'd catch a glimpse of my own face, cold, lifeless, staring back at me. My doppelganger, I realized, hadn't been destroyed. It was still lurking, waiting. Lily tried to move on, but we both carried deep scars from our time on Mount Mitchell. When she finally departed for another state, seeking a fresh start, I understood. She couldn't continue living in the shadow of that nightmare. And me? I'm still haunted. I poured my soul into writing a manuscript about everything that happened, detailing every bizarre and terrifying moment. It's my only way to cope and my last hope of exposing the truth if something happens to me. Every time I sit down to write, I sense my reflection behind me, silent and watchful, as though it's biding its time. Sarah remains missing. The official stories suggest she was never on Mount Mitchell, that she simply vanished of her own volition. But I know better. The mountain still looms large in my nightmares, a dark silhouette whispering of ancient curses and relentless doubles. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a faint rasp at my apartment door, or see a figure in the hallway mirror. I never open the door, and I never confront my own reflection. Because I know that once the doppelganger truly replaces you, there's no going back. You become the ghost in your own story. And that, I fear, is the fate that befell my sister, Sarah Mitchell Harper. A fate I may yet share. For no matter how far you run, Mount Mitchell's dark magic leaves a mark that never fades. And if you look long enough, you realize you can't escape your own shadow when it decides to stand apart. Story 5. My name is Ethan Harper, and I was 35 years old when the worst days of my life began in late autumn at a remote cabin on Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. Back then, I believed this trip would be my chance to find solitude and inspiration for my first novel. But what happened still keeps me awake at night, replaying every terrifying moment, every regret. It was a crisp morning when my wife, Mia, our 16-year-old daughter Lily, and I drove up the winding roads leading to Mount Mitchell State Park. Our SUV was loaded with groceries, camping gear, my laptop, and a range of supplies that we assumed would last us a couple of weeks. The plan was to stay in a historic cabin I had rented, an old structure rumored to have once belonged to a local guide who vanished decades ago under mysterious circumstances. I remember stepping out of the car, breathing in the sharp bite of the autumn air, feeling an excited thrill. Towering pines surrounded us, and the canopy of trees looked as if they were on fire, painted with rich reds and golds. Lily, always glued to her phone, tried to find a signal and groaned. Mia laughed, telling her to enjoy nature for a change. Despite the tension typical of a teenage daughter on a long family trip, I thought we were off to a good start. The cabin appeared to be everything I wanted for a writing retreat: rustic, isolated, and rich in history. The front porch sagged under the weight of time, but the inside was spacious enough for the three of us. Everything smelled faintly of old wood, mildew, and stale air. We spent the morning dusting, sweeping, and airing the place out. We left the windows open, letting in beams of sunlight and a chilly breeze. It wasn't long before we met Tom Reynolds, the owner of a neighboring cabin about half a mile down the winding dirt road. He was in his late 50s, with salt and pepper stubble and a deep voice laced with a southern drawl. Tom struck me as guarded, but he offered a friendly wave when he showed up that afternoon. Mia and Lily were on the porch, trying to get a portable radio working, and I was hauling boxes inside. Tom said he'd come by to welcome us and to warn us that storms around Mount Mitchell could be unpredictable this time of year. He also mentioned that cell service was unreliable, something we already suspected. He stood there, gaze flicking between the three of us, then leaned in as if sharing a secret. "You folks picked an interesting spot," he said. "This here cabin's got a history. Some say it's cursed, but I figure it keeps away the tourists." He flashed a grin that felt a little too forced. Then he told us a legend about a malevolent spirit in these woods. Locals called it the Shadow Walker, an ancient evil rumored to dwell in hidden hollows and prey on unsuspecting souls. Tom seemed almost excited to recount these tales, like he was waiting to see how we'd react. By late afternoon, the sky had grayed over. We heard distant thunder. The wind picked up, rustling the treetops in an eerie whisper. We decided to settle in for the evening, lighting a fire in the old brick hearth. Mia is a practical, outgoing woman, unafraid of ghost stories or roughing it in the wilderness. She cooked a hearty stew, insisting that a good meal would cure any nerves about storms or local folklore. Lily was more intrigued by Tom's story than she let on. She asked a few questions, but then changed the subject when Mia teased her about being scared. It was just past midnight when the first odd thing happened. I was in the living room, reviewing the outline for my novel, while Mia and Lily slept in the two small bedrooms. The wind howled outside, and the fire was dying down, so I went to add more logs. That's when I noticed a flicker of movement in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, a silhouette that slipped out of sight the second I glanced its way. I assumed it was just a trick of the light or my own fatigue, but something about that motion, too deliberate to be random, sent a chill down my spine. The next morning brought the beginnings of trouble with our equipment. My laptop, which had been fully charged, wouldn't turn on. The portable radio crackled and spat static. Mia found that our flashlights were dimming, despite brand new batteries. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, with thick clouds promising rain at any moment. We decided to explore the property in case there was a generator or some hidden fuse box. That was when we discovered strange symbols carved into several wooden beams underneath the cabin. They looked like runes or sigils. Lily took pictures on her phone, hoping to look them up online once we had a signal somewhere, but she kept complaining that her battery was draining unusually fast. Mia muttered that it was probably just paranoia creeping in from Tom's stories. The weather turned worse by the afternoon. Heavy rain lashed the windows. Thunder boomed across the mountain, and the winds rattled every loose shutter. Our only light came from flickering candles and a small lantern that somehow still worked. I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. Several times I thought I heard footsteps in the kitchen or on the porch, but each time I investigated, I found nothing. We were in the living room discussing whether we should leave early when Tom arrived. He stood in the doorway dripping wet, cradling something wrapped in a large plastic bag. He claimed it was a set of dry logs. Mia offered him a towel, but he just shook his head and asked if he could show us something. With the lantern lighting his features, I noticed a strange intensity in his eyes. Tom produced a leathery-bound journal from under his jacket. He said it belonged to the original cabin owner, a local guide who vanished in the 1940s. According to Tom, the man had recorded encounters with a being he called the Shadow Walker. Symbols in the journal matched the markings on our cabin's beams. The final entries were incoherent ramblings about a ritual sacrifice, one the man tried to perform to imprison the demon. Tom flipped through the pages carefully, as if they were sacred, and I couldn't help but notice the corner of his mouth twitch with a strange excitement. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Tom's profile. Mia, by contrast, looked concerned. Lily, huddling close to her mother, asked Tom if he really believed all that. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he snapped the journal shut and told us to be careful, then stepped back into the storm. I saw a faint smirk on his face as he left, and something inside me twisted with dread. The next couple of days were an exercise in frustration. The power and cell service never came back, even though the storm had mostly passed. My laptop was a useless hunk of metal. The few phone calls we managed to make never went through. I debated packing up the car and driving out, but our SUV refused to start one morning, like the battery had been drained. Lily was the first to see the shadow walker, or at least she insisted she saw something lurking by the tree line. She was outside with Mia, gathering fallen branches for firewood, when she started screaming. Mia rushed her back inside. Lily described a silhouette standing in the fog among the pines, whispering her name. Mia tried to calm her down, suggesting it was just Tom or maybe some passing hiker. But when Lily said its limbs looked too long and its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, I felt a shiver of recognition. It matched the presence I'd glimpsed in the hallway on our first night. By evening, tension mounted. The oppressive atmosphere weighed on all of us. Every shadow in the cabin seemed threatening. Small items, keys, utensils, even our water canteen, moved without explanation. Doors creaked, the floors groaned, and occasionally we heard that faint whisper echoing through the walls. The realization that we might be trapped with something truly malevolent in these woods began to sink in. A turning point arrived one night when Mia woke me around 2:30 a.m., her voice quivering with alarm. Lily was gone. The front door stood ajar, letting in a wet gust of wind. Panic exploded inside me. We sprinted into the dark, calling her name, stumbling with flashlights that dimmed and flickered as soon as we turned them on. I could scarcely see more than a few feet ahead. Mia slipped on wet leaves, bruising her knee, but we pressed on, fighting our way through the underbrush, shouting for Lily until our throats hurt. It must have been an hour later, or perhaps more, when we spotted Tom's cabin lights. They flickered in the gloom like a sickly beacon. Without hesitation, we barged inside and found Lily bound to a chair, tape across her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tom stood over her, a knife in his hand. But the scene was even more horrifying than it first appeared. The entire living room was filled with bizarre relics: animal bones, black candles, scrawled symbols on the floor in what looked like dried blood. The odor of copper and rot filled the air. Tom stared at me with wild eyes. "It's for the ritual," he hissed. "The Shadow Walker's power is real, Ethan. I can use it, but it needs a sacrifice. A soul to feed on." He advanced, the blade glinting in the flicker of candlelight. Anger and fear tightened in my chest, but I forced myself to move. I lunged at Tom, knocking him to the ground. Mia rushed in to free Lily, ripping away the tape and cutting the cords. Lily's sobs pierced the air. Then, as I pinned Tom to the floor, the lights blinked out. All around us, shadows writhed, as though the walls had come alive. A guttural hiss or moan reverberated through the cabin. In a flash of lightning from outside, I saw a shape, tall, spindly arms, eyes that glowed with an unnatural darkness, standing right behind Tom. Before I could react, that shape reached for him. Tom screamed, a piercing sound of utter terror. Then he was gone, dragged away into the darkness with a violent jerk. The cabin door slammed shut on its own, and all the candles snuffed out simultaneously. In total darkness, I grabbed Mia's hand and felt for Lily. We bolted outside, stumbling over the threshold. Tom's agonized screams echoed once more, then abruptly cut off. The wind whipped at us, swirling dead leaves around our feet. We didn't stop running until we reached our own cabin, hearts pounding so fiercely it hurt. Inside, we locked every door and pushed furniture against them. Lily clung to me, sobbing. Mia tried to hide her own tears, but I saw them shimmering in the glow of our sole remaining lantern. That night, the Shadow Walker tormented us. Floorboards creaked with no one there. Doors rattled as if battered by an unseen force. A whispering chant echoed through the darkness, a language that made my skin crawl. We took turns trying to stay awake, standing guard, but exhaustion overtook us near dawn. When I woke, Lily was curled in a corner, asleep on a pile of blankets. Mia was nowhere to be seen. Panicked, I roused Lily and frantically searched the cabin. I found the back door wide open, leading out to a narrow path behind the property. My heart hammered so loudly I could hardly think. Then I heard Mia's voice near the tree line. Rushing outside, I saw her standing among the moss-covered trunks, her back turned to me. I called her name, and she turned. The expression on her face was utterly foreign. Cold, blank eyes with a slight tilt of her head that reminded me of a predatory animal. She hissed something I couldn't understand. Her voice layered with a deeper, rasping tone. I realized the truth in that horrifying moment. Mia was possessed. The Shadow Walker had taken hold of her. She lunged forward, nearly tackling me to the ground. An inhuman strength coursed through her slim figure. I tried to hold her arms, but she was so strong it was like wrestling a frenzied beast. Lily screamed. Mia's fingers clawed at my face and her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Then, in that layered voice, she spat a horrifying command. "Submit to me, or die." A burst of adrenaline fueled me. I managed to twist free and knock Mia off balance. She fell, striking her head on a rock. Lily rushed to her side, sobbing, unsure what to do. For a moment, Mia's eyes flickered back to normal, and I saw a flash of recognition. Then she fainted. We carefully carried her into the cabin, bound her wrists with rope, an act that tore me up inside, but I had no choice. Lily cried, terrified we were hurting her mother, but I explained it was the only way to keep everyone safe until we figured out how to free her. Sometime that afternoon, a battered SUV pulled up outside. A tall woman stepped out wearing a rumpled coat and a stern expression. She identified herself as Detective Laura Mitchell. She said locals had reported screams and strange lights in these woods. She demanded to know where Tom Reynolds was. I explained as best I could, but she looked at me with heavy skepticism, especially when I mentioned the demon. Then she heard Mia's muffled shrieks from the back room. Detective Mitchell rushed in and found Mia bound. Before we could stop her, she loosened the ropes enough for Mia to lunge at her. Mia's eyes were pitch black, lips pulled back in a gruesome grin. She nearly sank her teeth into Mitchell's arm. With my help, the detective overpowered Mia. Panting, she stared at me, clearly rattled. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded. I decided we needed to show her Tom's cabin, show her the evidence of his twisted ritual, the wreckage left behind. She agreed to come with me, while Lily stayed behind with the unconscious, still-bound Mia. But when we arrived at Tom's place, it was different. The symbols on the floor had disappeared, the candles were gone, and there was no sign of the bones or the dried blood. Tom was nowhere to be found, and the living room looked as though no one had ever performed a ritual there. Detective Mitchell grew angry, thinking I'd lied to her. Desperate, I searched every corner for proof. I found only Tom's battered pickup truck out back, splattered with mud and jammed against a tree as if he'd tried fleeing in a hurry. Nothing else. Suddenly, a horrifying scream pierced the quiet afternoon air, echoing from the direction of our cabin. Without a second thought, I dashed outside, the detective on my heels. When we reached our front porch, Lily was gone. The ropes around Mia lay in a heap, severed. Detective Mitchell kept her hand on her holster, scanning the area. My mind reeled. "Lily!" I shouted, running inside. The living room was empty, the back door again open. Dread sank into my gut, heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I stepped outside, calling my daughter's name repeatedly. No answer. Then, from deep in the forest, I heard Lily scream. Detective Mitchell and I raced through the undergrowth, stumbling over roots and slick rocks. The detective tried calling for backup, but her radio spit static. She cursed under her breath. We found Lily near a cluster of large boulders. She was trembling, hugging her knees. Mia stood behind her, possessed eyes glowing with that unnatural darkness. Mia's expression twisted in a sadistic smirk, and she wrapped an arm around Lily's neck, tightening her hold. I froze, terrified to make a move. Detective Mitchell unholstered her gun but hesitated. The wind picked up, swirling leaves around us in a vortex. Mia spoke in that layered voice again, promising that if we tried to interfere, Lily would be next. Just then, a shadow, tall, elongated, manifested at the edge of my vision, drifting between the trees. I recognized the Shadow Walker. Its presence felt like a living nightmare pressing down on every fiber of my being. In that heartbeat of terror, Mia's face contorted with confusion, as if she were fighting the demon from within. She released Lily and staggered backward. The detective seized the moment, pulling Lily free. I rushed forward and tackled Mia to the ground, pinning her. She shrieked like a wounded animal. Then her muscles spasmed. A wave of dark energy pulsed through the air. I felt an invisible force slam into me, sending me sprawling. Detective Mitchell raised her weapon, aimed at Mia, but paused when I shouted for her not to shoot. I couldn't bear the thought of losing my wife to a bullet. I crawled back to Mia, ignoring the pain in my ribs. She was convulsing, eyes rolling, foam at the corners of her mouth. With shaking hands, I remembered the journal Tom had shown us, the incantations, the symbols. I had taken pictures on Lily's phone. Maybe there was something in there, some way to reverse this possession. "Cover me!" I yelled at Detective Mitchell. She stood by, gun ready, as I frantically searched Mia's pockets for Lily's phone. It was still there, but the screen was cracked. By some miracle, it still powered on. I scrolled through the photos, scanning the half-legible pages. I recognized a phrase repeated over the demon's name, something that looked like a banishment prayer. In desperation, I began to recite the words phonetically. At first, nothing happened. Mia's eyes remained black, her face twisted. The air around us grew frigid. I kept chanting, forcing each syllable from my dry mouth. Then, with a deafening crack, lightning split the sky overhead. Mia's body arched, and a guttural roar tore from her throat. The shape at the edge of the trees, the Shadow Walker, lurched forward almost as if it was being yanked against its will. For a moment, time froze. Mia gasped and her eyes flickered. The shadowy figure thrashed, then ripped itself away, retreating into the darkness of the forest as if pulled by invisible chains. The wind died down. Mia collapsed into my arms, breathing but barely conscious. Detective Mitchell stared at us with a look of disbelief. We carried Mia back to the cabin. She was weak, delirious, and had no memory of what happened after the storm began days earlier. Lily clung to her, sobbing and relieved. We all huddled inside, unsure if the demon had truly been banished. After a long silence, Detective Mitchell said she'd call for medical help and a forensics team to investigate. She tried the radio again, and this time, there was a faint signal. I heard her speak into the device. "Dispatch, this is Detective Mitchell. I have 3 survivors at the old cabin on..." Then the radio crackled out, going silent. An hour later, a pair of unmarked SUVs arrived, headlights sweeping over the cabin. Men in suits stepped out, scanning the area with flashlights. One of them shook hands with Detective Mitchell, spoke in hushed tones. I caught phrases like federal jurisdiction and contain the situation. They took our statements separately, asking me over and over what I'd seen, how Tom was involved, if I had any evidence of his ritual. Meanwhile, other agents went to Tom's cabin, returning with blank expressions that told me they found nothing incriminating. No trace of Tom. No bones, no blood. No sign of the dark ceremony that once stained the floors. By dawn, these agents informed us we were free to go but stressed we should keep the details to ourselves, implying that talking too much would be unwise. Detective Mitchell took me aside, muttering she was being shut out from her own case, that something wasn't right. She warned me that these guys would likely bury the whole incident. If Tom ever resurfaced, if the demon was not truly gone, we might never know the full story. They had ways of making sure no one believed us. We left that cursed cabin as soon as the roads were clear enough. Mia seemed physically stable, yet drained. Lily huddled in the back seat, arms around herself, staring out the window. We passed the forest where the creature had lurked. I kept expecting to see some shape flitting between the trees, but all I saw was the morning sun illuminating the fading autumn leaves. 2 days later, Mia disappeared without a word. Lily and I woke up in our home to find a note on the kitchen counter in a script that did not look like Mia's. It said only, "Forgive me, I must return." Lily fell to her knees, tears spilling as I crumpled the note. I contacted Detective Mitchell, frantic, and she told me in a hushed voice that no official search would be launched. There was too much pressure from higher-ups to keep the entire matter quiet. There might not be anything she could do. I never learned whether Mia was truly free or if the demon still lingered in her mind. Every night, I see her face in my dreams, eyes flickering between the woman I love and the thing that wanted to destroy us all. Sometimes I wonder if the Shadow Walker is out there, biding its time, waiting for another chance to finish what it started. Lily tries to be strong, but I see the haunted look in her eyes. She can't forget the screams, or the way her mother nearly strangled her under the demon's control. I haven't given up searching. Deep down, I feel Mia may still be alive, wandering those cursed woods on Mount Mitchell, or trapped somewhere else, caught between our world and that shadowy realm. With every passing day, the memory of what happened grows sharper, not duller. The local authorities dismissed us, the FBI agents brushed us off, but I know the truth of that place. I feel it in every shiver that crawls down my spine when I think of the swirling leaves and the horrific shadows. I'm sharing this story not for pity or attention, but as a warning. Something ancient and evil lurks in that remote corner of North Carolina, and people in power seem all too eager to hide it. So, if you ever find yourself drawn to an isolated cabin, thinking you'll find peace or inspiration, think twice. Because what waits in the darkness might be far more real and far more hungry than you ever imagined. And if you do hear those whispers in the night, or sense a tall figure stalking the edges of your vision, remember the name, the Shadow Walker. Pray it doesn't remember you back. Story 6. My name is Emma Collins, and I am 38 years old. This happened in late October of last year, when my family and I set out to hike a secluded stretch of the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina. We believed it would be a fun, meaningful way to bond, but we had no idea the horrors we would encounter deep in those ancient woods. I was the one who planned this trip. I'm a middle school teacher, used to meticulous schedules, laminated lesson plans, and problem-solving under pressure. My husband, Ryan, is a 39-year-old IT professional who has always loved hiking and challenges that test his physical endurance. Our daughter, Lily, was only 12, too young for the realities we would soon face, yet old enough to share our enthusiasm for the great outdoors. We also invited my best friend Jake Thompson and his girlfriend, Sophie Martinez. Jake worked as a graphic designer, a man with an easy laugh and a knack for lifting everyone's spirits. Sophie was a nurse, calm, analytical, and caring. They believed that together, our personalities and skills would form the perfect team. We started our hike in the late afternoon. The crisp autumn air was invigorating, and the forest was alive with brilliant hues of orange and red. We planned to spend a week trekking through this remote section near the Pisgah National Forest. The trail itself was breathtaking. Winding paths, old-growth trees, and an abundance of wildlife. The first 2 days were filled with the usual minor inconveniences, a misplaced water filter, some trouble adjusting to the cold nights, and Lily's complaints that her boots were giving her blisters. Things began to change on the 3rd day. Although we still had laughs around the campfire at night, a sense of unease crept into our group. We started noticing peculiar symbols carved into the bark of certain trees, jagged shapes arranged in circles and lines that looked older than anything I'd seen before. Jake took pictures, joking they might make great inspiration for a design project. But Sophie seemed disturbed, gently suggesting we should be cautious of disturbing old sites or markings that might hold cultural significance. By the time the sun set on our fourth day, our GPS devices began malfunctioning. They flickered and reset without explanation, while the printed map appeared to lead us in circles. We lost track of the main trail, forced to rely on Ryan's compass that refused to budge from a single direction. The forest seemed changed. Every so often, Lily would stare off into the distance and say she'd glimpsed a dark, human-like figure weaving between the trees. I tried to dismiss her words, telling myself she just had an active imagination. But deep down, I felt it too, that sense of being watched, an unsettling static in the air. On the evening of the fifth day, we came across a man named Ben Harris. He emerged from the dense undergrowth, greeting us politely and explaining that he was a local guide. He said he knew the area well and offered to show us a safer path. At first, I was cautious. There's something inherently unsettling about meeting a stranger in the middle of nowhere. But Lily was the first to warm up to him, and Ryan's relief at having someone familiar with the region was too great to ignore. Ben had weathered features, a patchy beard, and eyes that rarely blinked. He guided us away from our planned route, claiming a newly formed landslide had destroyed part of the trail. Against my better judgment, we followed him. That night, we camped near a rocky outcropping. As we set up our tents, the wind picked up dramatically, bringing in a chill that made me shiver despite my layered clothing. When darkness fell, strange noises carried through the woods, like hushed whispers or perhaps chanting, but too faint to understand. Jake and I exchanged worried glances, neither wanting to spook the others. Just as I drifted off to sleep, I heard a distant scream. I rushed out of my tent, but Ryan, Jake, and Sophie had heard nothing. Lily was still sound asleep. Ben stood outside his own tent, staring into the blackness as if he knew something I did not. Morning brought heavy fog that seemed unnaturally thick. We broke camp with difficulty, the damp air penetrating our gear. Sophie looked rattled, mentioning that she'd had nightmares about people with twisted faces roaming the woods. Jake tried to lighten the mood by teasing her about horror movies, but his voice lacked its usual levity. Even Ryan, typically the adventurous risk-taker, seemed withdrawn. We continued on, led by Ben, who said fewer and fewer words as the day progressed. A few hours into the hike, we discovered more carved symbols on the rocks and trees. They were similar to the ones we'd seen earlier, but larger, more elaborate. Lily's fascination with them grew, and she stopped to trace the lines with her fingers, whispering that she could sense something old beneath her touch. I scolded her gently, insisting we stay together and not dwell on odd carvings. A creeping fear gnawed at my stomach. By early afternoon, our path led us to a narrow ravine, and Ben insisted we descend into it to avoid a supposed rockslide further up. With the fog still settled around us, we descended single file, mud sucking at our boots. At one point, Jake lost his footing and slid a few yards, scraping up his knee. Sophie was quick to administer first aid, but I caught the look in Jake's eyes. He was spooked, and so was I. It wasn't until we reached a flatter area at the bottom that Ben's true intentions surfaced. While we rested on fallen logs, Ben pulled Ryan aside, claiming there was a safer route out of the ravine. We stayed put, waiting for them to return. A half hour passed before Ryan finally emerged, pale and trembling. He didn't speak, just shook his head and looked at me with a frantic desperation in his eyes. Suddenly, a terrible shriek echoed through the ravine. I whirled to see Sophie being dragged away into the fog by a figure I could barely make out. "Sophie!" Jake roared, lunging forward, but he slipped on the wet ground. By the time we got closer, she was gone. The only thing left behind was a scattering of broken twigs and footprints that seemed half human, half beast. The shape of them made no sense. Elongated toes, a narrowing heel. We searched, calling Sophie's name, but only silence greeted us. In the chaos, Ben reappeared, a cold smile on his face that made my blood run cold. His eyes looked black, empty, as he stood atop a rock outcropping. "You won't find her," he said quietly. "She's with Morgra now." "Morgra?" I demanded, my voice shaking, but Ben just laughed, an eerie, rasping sound that vibrated through the fog. Then, just as abruptly, he vanished into the tree line. Ryan fell to his knees, cursing under his breath. Lily clung to me, trembling. Jake stared at where Sophie had disappeared, despair etched across his face. We needed to find Sophie. I convinced the others that we had to press on, that maybe she had been taken to a place nearby. In my mind, I refused to believe she might be gone forever. I didn't even know who or what Morgra was. All I knew was that we had to rescue Sophie before it was too late. The sun dipped behind the mountains, though the dense fog obscured the changing light. Our group, now fractured and terrified, made slow progress. After another half hour, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a rotting wooden cabin, its windows boarded up and its door missing. Pieces of paper and scraps of clothing lay scattered around the entrance. An unholy stench wafted from within. Jake called out for Sophie, his voice echoing. No answer. We stepped in cautiously, flashlights revealing a single large room littered with bones. Human bones, animal bones, and half-decayed remains that were too horrific to dwell upon. Lily gagged. I forced her to turn away. Ryan shouted Sophie's name, frantic. A sudden moan from behind a makeshift partition made us jump. We found Sophie crumpled on the floor, her wrists and ankles bound with rope. Her face was streaked with tears and blood, and her clothes were torn. Jake rushed to her, nearly sobbing with relief and horror. She was alive, but disoriented. Between shallow breaths, she whispered, It's not human. It's trying to summon something." We freed Sophie and tended to her injuries as best we could. She mumbled about being offered to Morgra. I thought back to Ben's words about Morgra. Something about that name filled me with dread. We had to get out of there, but none of us had any clue which way to go. A dreadful howling pierced the silence, making every hair on my arms stand on end. We turned to see a figure at the cabin's threshold. It was Ben, but not quite. His face seemed distorted, like he was wearing his own skin incorrectly. With a low, guttural growl, he changed before our eyes, limbs contorting, face elongating, until all semblance of humanity vanished. We were staring at something monstrous. A skinwalker, Lily would later call it. Morgra. Jake hurled a piece of broken timber at it, and we fled out the back of the cabin, helping Sophie as she limped along. Morgra let out an ear-splitting shriek. We could hear it barreling through the brush behind us, its heavy footsteps snapping twigs and rustling leaves. Lily screamed that she saw the shape splitting into two, then back to one. Our eyes couldn't track its movements. The chase felt endless. We ran until our lungs burned, weaving through thick undergrowth. The forest floor was slick, branches slapped at our faces, and every step threatened to send us tumbling. At some point, Lily cried out, claiming she saw a second figure running parallel to us, just out of sight. I was too terrified to look. Adrenaline fueled us as we broke through a cluster of pines and into another clearing. Darkness had almost swallowed the land by then, but the moonlight offered faint illumination. The clearing was scattered with more strange symbols etched into stones. Jake collapsed to his knees, winded, and Sophie sank down beside him, trembling. Ryan pulled me aside. "Emma," he whispered urgently, "Ben told me things. Things about Morgra. He said it's older than these mountains. It can wear any form, human, animal, something between. The local tribes once performed rituals to keep it at bay, but those rituals were lost. Now, it's free." My stomach lurched. Why would Ben... Ryan hesitated, swallowing hard. Ben was part of this cult, I guess. He wants to feed Morgra fresh souls to maintain its power. Before I could respond, Lily gasped and pointed a shaking finger at Jake. He had collapsed fully onto the ground, eyes rolling back into his head. Sophie tried to help him, but he suddenly jerked upright, face contorting as though in pain. He let out a guttural moan, grabbed Sophie by the arm, and yanked her close. I rushed forward to pull them apart, but Jake shoved me away with inhuman strength. Then he pinned Sophie to the ground. Horrified, I realized that something else was controlling him. It took both Ryan and me to wrestle Jake off Sophie. Sophie scrambled back, tears streaming. "He's possessed," she choked out. "It's Morgra's presence. It can get into your mind." Jake lunged for me next, eyes glazed with fury, but Lily stepped between us. She locked eyes with him, tears staining her cheeks. For a moment he hesitated, confusion flickering in his gaze. Then, with a roar, he grabbed Lily by the shoulders. Ryan, in a burst of panic, tackled Jake, sending them both tumbling onto the damp leaves. They struggled violently, Jake thrashing like a man possessed, because he was. "Jake, stop!" I yelled, trying to pull them apart. My friend's face had twisted into a mask of rage. He snapped his teeth at Ryan, nearly biting his arm. There was a glint of a blade. Ryan had drawn his hunting knife. The world seemed to slow. Jake was about to crush Lily's windpipe with his bare hands. With no other choice, Ryan drove the blade deep into Jake's side. Jake made a strangled sound, his eyes widening. He stared at Ryan in shock, then let Lily go. With a soft gasp, he collapsed onto his back. Sophie crawled to him, sobbing, trying to stanch the blood flow, but there was too much. In the moonlight, Jake's face relaxed, the malevolent possession receding, leaving behind only terror and regret. He died moments later, his blood soaking into the ground while Sophie begged him to hold on. We barely had time to grieve. A low growl resonated through the clearing. Morgra emerged again, this time in the form of a towering bipedal beast, its limbs unnervingly long, claws scraping the ground. Ryan dragged Lily behind me, and we stood in front of Sophie, who was still crouched over Jake's body. Morgra advanced slowly, relishing our horror. Somehow, Lily must have sensed a path. She grabbed my hand and pointed deeper into the woods. I saw a flicker of movement, perhaps a faint light. Without another option, we ran again, leaving Jake's body behind. Sophie managed to stand, but she was in shock, tears streaming silently down her face. We raced through the forest, Morgra's unearthly howls echoing behind us. The trees ended abruptly at a wide ridge. Below lay another ravine, and a trail that might have once been a road. Near the bottom of the slope was another structure, smaller than the cabin but still intact. We slid down the slope, using rocks and roots to steady ourselves. My heart pounded in my chest, certain this place would either be our salvation or our doom. When we reached the structure, a ramshackle shack with a collapsed roof on one side, Sophie keeled over, retching from pain and exhaustion. Inside, it smelled of rot and wet dirt, but at least it offered partial shelter. We barricaded what remained of the door with debris and huddled together in the darkness. Ryan wrapped his arms around Lily, who stared blankly ahead, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. I crouched beside Sophie, checking her wounds as best I could. A scratchy whisper slid through the walls, or maybe it was inside our minds. It was Morgra's voice beckoning us out. The roof creaked as something heavy paced above, scraping back